Dick Slater wasn't a wrestler. He was a bar fight that just kept walking into the ring. If Terry Funk was wild and Harley Race was tough, Slater was the guy who'd fist fight you because you held the door open for him. Known for stiff punches, a bullet wound he laughed off, and a face that looked like it never healed from 1983. Slater carried the aura of a man permanently 3 beers deep and 3 seconds from snapping. He wasn't trying to be your friend backstage, and the feeling was mutual. These weren't storylines. These were shoot fights, brawls, betrayals, and enough heat to grill ribs on a cold Georgia morning. The following 5 weren't just opponents. They were names Slater either genuinely hated or sent flying into furniture for real. If you thought Slater wrestled rough, wait till you hear how he handled bar tabs and jealousy. Let's roll. Before Sting was the icon, he was just a dude with a flat top and the bad luck of flirting, accidentally or not, with Dick Slater's girlfriend, Dark Journey. Now, this wasn't a TV angle. This was real life. And in real life, Slater didn't do passive-aggressive. He did aggressive-aggressive, the kind of guy who treated jealousy like a full-contact sport. Slater heard whispers Sting might have been getting cozy with Journey. So what did he do? He cornered Sting backstage and reportedly shoved his head in a toilet. A literal toilet, like a high school bully, but with a perm and a license to carry a steel chair. The Ultimate Warrior, Sting's tag partner at the time, jumped in, probably thinking this was a tag match. Slater started swinging anyway. Dick Murdoch had to break it up, and when he's the voice of reason, you're basically living in a CTE fever dream. Tracy Smothers later confirmed it all went down. And Slater never denied it, didn't even act sorry, because Dick Slater never apologized. He just walked away like someone asked him to move his truck. There's no record of Sting firing back, probably because he was smart. You don't play chicken with a guy who once shrugged off a gunshot like a mosquito bite. Slater thought Sting was getting too close to his valet, so he baptized him in a toilet. Nothing says hands off like giving your coworker a swirl in front of the urinal cakes. Backstage, it was a statement. In Slater's world, the matches might have been scripted, but the warnings, those were shoot. Most wrestling bar stories end with a punch. This one ends with a gunshot. Slater was out drinking with Wahoo McDaniel, Tommy Rich, and a few other guys in Atlanta. Spirits were high. Then Slater, in classic Slater fashion, mouthed off, allegedly about Tommy Rich's wife. And, in a moment that tells you everything about 1980s wrestling, Wahoo pulled out a handgun and fired. The bullet grazed Slater's leg. Now, most people, when they get shot, call it a night, maybe the week. Not Slater. He walked it off, told people it was just a scratch, then went around joking that a sniper took him out. Imagine shrugging off a gun wound like it was a stubbed toe, then hitting the ring 3 weeks later like you just overslept. There was no locker room investigation, no HR complaint, not even a real apology. Because everyone involved was so soaked in beer and ego, they probably just chalked it up to boys being boys with firearms. The beef itself, never squashed, never escalated. It just existed. 2 dangerous men, 1 bullet, and a leg that lived to tell the tale. Only in wrestling can you insult a guy's wife, get shot in the leg, and show up to work like it was a twisted team-building exercise. And Slater? He didn't even sell it. Man took a bullet and still no sold it harder than 2000's Triple H. If you owe a guy money, you pay him back. If you don't, and that guy is Bob Roop, he might hit you with a blackjack in a bar. That's what happened to Slater. Allegedly. Roop walked up behind him and whacked him in the skull, accusing him of stiffing alone. Bad idea. Because Slater didn't go down. He went forward. He tackled Roop and slammed him into a soda machine so hard the thing stopped working. This wasn't a wrestling match. This was 2 grown men turning a bar into a demolition derby over $50 and bruised pride. Slater later told the story with a grin, like a guy remembering his favorite fishing trip, not a full-contact felony. According to him, Roop got the worst of it, walking away dazed and dripping. And while Slater might have left with a welt, he didn't lose the fight, or the refund. There was no locker room fallout, no charges, just another bar ruined and 2 veterans who never roomed together again. In other professions, this ends in court. In wrestling, you just don't split a hotel anymore. Roop came to collect a loan and ended up buying himself a concussion from a vending machine. That's Dick Slater. You could hit him in the head, but you better hope he's not thirsty when he gets up. Slater didn't hate Ric Flair the way you hate a guy who stole your car. It was more like the hate you reserve for a coworker who always gets the promotion while you're still chasing per diem. In 1985, Slater and Bob Orton Jr. were booked in Mid-Atlantic as bounty hunters hired by Gary Hart to take out Ric Flair. The gimmick? Beat him down so bad he can't defend his title. Real old-school heel stuff. Except Slater took it a little too literally. They pile-drove Flair on TV, stuffed a bag over his head like it was a hostage video, and then stood over him like henchmen in a low-budget crime film. The problem? It didn't look fake. In fact, it looked very real. The fans freaked out. The station got complaints, the network got nervous, and Slater, he got canned. The angle was so hot, they pulled the plug before it melted the studio. Flair never spoke out publicly, but insiders say he wasn't thrilled. Slater had crossed the line, not in the ring, but on TV, in front of people who weren't in on the joke. In a world where blood was normal, Slater made it look like a snuff film. Slater didn't sell the angle, he sold terror. And when the network started sweating, guess who got tossed out the back door like expired catering? It wasn't personal, but it definitely felt like someone wanted Flair gone, and Slater just happened to bring a bag and a grudge. The real kicker? Slater didn't think he did anything wrong. From his point of view, he was just doing his job better than anyone else. Make it look real? He made it look too real. That was the problem. And in Slater's world, that wasn't a mistake. That was a compliment. The bag, the pile driver, the chaos? That wasn't crossing the line. That was the line. Everyone else just didn't have the guts to step over it. When you step on Dick Slater's toes, you're getting hit. When you mess with his valet, you're basically asking to get buried face first in a ditch. And Jake the Snake Roberts nearly did. Back in Mid-South, Roberts was a rising sadist with a snake and a DDT. Slater was paired with Dark Journey, the same woman at the center of his earlier Sting beef. During their feud, Roberts DDT'd her on TV. Not teased it, not faked it. He planted her like a tent peg. It got massive heat from the crowd, but Slater didn't think it was heat. He thought it was disrespect. There were whispers backstage that Slater hadn't approved the spot, and even if he did, that didn't mean he was okay with watching the woman he was involved with take a head spike from a guy with a history of snakes and drugs. After that episode aired, the feud never escalated. In fact, it cooled off fast. So fast that some insiders figured it was shut down to keep Slater from breaking Jake's ribs backstage. The tension was real, the respect wasn't, and Roberts, who had no problem burning bridges, never mentioned Slater much again. That silence speaks volumes. Roberts dropped a snake and a DDT. Slater dropped a grudge and possibly a phone call to someone who knew how to find your hotel room key. This wasn't a long-running war. It was a sudden spark, one that could have lit the whole locker room on fire if bookers didn't kill it early. When Slater's real life bled into the gimmick, people learned to back off before he made things permanent. Some guys played tough. This one was tough, and not in the gym strength kind of way. In the walks it off after a gunshot kind of way. He didn't need a feud to throw hands, he just needed a reason. And if you couldn't give him one, he'd invent one mid-promo, mid-bar tab, or mid-pile driver. He didn't care if you were green, seasoned, famous, or bulletproof. If you crossed a line, real or imagined, you got dragged across it face first, sometimes through a vending machine, sometimes through a locker room door. He didn't burn bridges, he collapsed them like condemned buildings. No titles needed, no legacy package required. His reputation was built off real receipts and the kind of stories people whisper about when the room gets quiet. He wasn't a legend because of what he won. He was a legend because nobody ever wanted to lose to him in real life. If you're still here, you're either into shoot fights or just love a good barroom brainbuster. Either way, drop a like, hit subscribe, and leave a comment like you're filing a workers' comp claim at 3 a.m. More locker room horror stories coming. Just try not to end up in one. Rick Martell might have looked like he walked off a GQ runway and into the wrong locker room, but don't let the moose and mirrors fool you. Under the model gimmick was a territorial tough guy from Quebec who could go in the ring and throw shade so cold it came with frostbite. Most guys in wrestling thought Martell was too classy to carry grudges. Yeah, tell that to the 3 dudes he basically sent to voicemail for life. Martell wasn't out here starting bar fights or throwing furniture. He wasn't that kind of cat. But if you crossed him, he cut you off like a French waiter mid-shift, and once you were out, you were out. No handshake, no comeback tour. Just a puff of cologne and a one-way ticket to go F yourselfville, the nice Canadian version. Let's break down the 3 poor bastards Rick Martell truly couldn't stand. And no, it ain't kayfabe. This was real, documented. Cold-blooded shoot hate, delivered with a smirk and polished boots. You ever walk into a party and see a guy you know just shouldn't be there? That was Rick Martell every time Dino Bravo walked into a locker room. On the surface, they were two proud Quebec stars, carrying the torch of French-Canadian wrestling. But backstage, it was like watching a tag team of a wine sommelier and a guy who eats cigarettes for breakfast. Dino ran Montreal like he was Tony Soprano, minus the charisma plus the velour. When he got power in international wrestling, he started treating it like a one-man mafia, cutting deals, booking himself strong, and icing out guys who wouldn't kiss the ring. And Martell? He wouldn't even walk in the same building if Bravo was handling the thermostat. Gino Brito and other insiders confirmed it. Martell deliberately avoided working under Bravo's banner, not because he was scared. No. Martell just didn't want to owe anybody anything, especially a guy who booked himself like a demigod and handled business like a backroom blackjack dealer. Martell was out here dressing like a model. Bravo dressed like he was about to boost VCRs out of a U-Haul. Then came the real red flag. Vice called Martell to appear on the dark side of the ring doc about Dino's murder and shady connections. Rick? He said, nope. Not I'm busy, not maybe next season? Just a full French-Canadian hell no. When a guy refuses to be interviewed for a documentary about someone he worked with for years, that's not respect. That's a restraining order in spirit. Martell kept it clean. He never talked trash. But that was the genius of it. He didn't need to. Rick didn't throw fists, he threw distance. He didn't bury Bravo, he vanished. No collabs, no quotes, no comment. Like a hitman who just crossed the name off the list and lit a fresh cigarette. If Rick Martell's real-life relationships were a cologne shelf, Dino Bravo's bottle got thrown in the trash, sealed, unopened, still reeking of desperation and bad booking. Rick Martell could work with anyone, unless your name was Jacques Rougeau. Then he'd rather iron his own eyebrows with a waffle iron than tag with you. When Jacques walked into a room, people didn't ask how he was. They checked who he was currently stabbing in the back. WWF tried to float a tag team pairing. Martell and Jacques, two Quebec stars. Sounds like money, right? Martell's reply, I'd rather take a bump off a maple tree. He shut that door so fast, the hinges filed a workers' comp claim. Here's why. Jacques didn't play politics. He was politics. He made Bret Hart look like a nun. If there was a backstage meeting, Jacques was already there, taking notes, moving chairs, and whispering who should get buried that week. He ran locker rooms like middle school hallways, full of whisper campaigns, fake smiles, and atomic-level sneakiness. Rick Martell saw it from a mile away and turned around before the suck started. And this wasn't speculation. Martell publicly said he didn't want to team with Jacques, said he was too much of a headache. That's polite Quebec speak for this guy's a walking root canal in tights. Jacques thought he was Machiavelli. Martell saw a clown trying to rewrite the script mid-match and still take credit for the finish. Even worse, Jacques was one of those guys who never let things go. You beat him, he'd remind you the next 3 years. You got booked over him? Suddenly, your suitcase went missing. Martell wasn't into that. He was old school. Show up, do business, leave clean. Jacques turned every hallway into a political campaign and every locker room into an HR investigation. At one point, Jacques apparently tried smoothing things over, even offered to work a program. Martell's response? He didn't even say no, he just stopped answering. The French version of ghosting, silent, professional, and permanent. Rick Martell once sprayed arrogance to avoid catching the flu. With Jacques Rougeau, he'd have needed an exorcism, a contract lawyer, and a priest on retainer. Tom Zenk was the kind of guy who looked like he should have been a star, until he opened his mouth. Then you realized, oh, this guy thinks charisma is a tax deduction. He and Martell were the Can-Am connection, a tag team that moved like Ricky Steamboat and talked like a voicemail from your ex. They had abs, tans, and the kind of synergy that screamed, one of us is going to snap by June. And spoiler, it wasn't Martell. Martell came from the old school, show up, do the job, don't cry about it world. Zenk came from Planet Complain, where every handshake came with a conspiracy theory and a receipts folder. The beef started over money. Zenk believed Martell stiffed him on payoffs from their AWA days. Martell claimed it was Zenk who didn't understand the deal. And from that moment on, Zenk dedicated the rest of his career to burning a bridge that no one was even trying to walk across. We're talking 30 years of crybaby interviews. Tom Zenk shot on Martell so often, you'd think Rick keyed his car and ran off with his aunt. Zenk said Martell was a liar, a stooge, and not who he appears to be. He even claimed Martell tried to get him blackballed. which is rich coming from a guy who blackballed himself by turning WCW Worldwide into a therapy session? Martell? He barely responded. That's what made it worse. Zenk came at him with heat and receipts, and Martell countered with, I wish him well. That's the wrestling version of saying, tell your therapist I'm not responsible. He ghosted Zenk like a gym buddy who stopped spotting you once you blamed him for your divorce. To Martell, Zenk was a mosquito, loud, annoying, and obsessed with his own buzz. He didn't hate him, he just didn't rate him. That's the worst insult of all, and Zenk knew it. That's why he kept barking. He wanted the fight. Martell wouldn't even send a smoke signal. Zenk threw shade. Martell just adjusted his cuffs and walked away like the valet just brought the car around. Zenk spent years firing off shoot interviews like he was auditioning for Behind the Music, the Paranoia edition. Every promoter, every fan, every barista heard about how Martell betrayed him. At one point, he claimed Rick cost him millions. Brother, you wrestled in Zubaz on a Wednesday. The only thing Rick cost you was another booking in St. Paul. Martell didn't bury Zenk. He outclassed him. In silence. Like a man watching a tantrum through soundproof glass. The Can-Am connection broke up once, but Zenk never stopped fighting the rematch, in his own head. At the end of the day, Tom Zenk's legacy is a footnote in Martell's patience, and if Rick ever sprayed arrogance near Zenk, it wasn't to show off, it was to mask the scent of career death. Rick Martell never needed to punch you in the mouth. He just needed to never say your name again. That's how these three ended up here. Zenk, Bravo, and Rougeau, each a case study in what happens when Rick decides your existence is optional. Zenk ran his mouth for decades and still couldn't land a proper receipt. Martell just breezed by, perfectly moisturized, like Zenk was a stain on the mirror he never wiped off. Dino Bravo tried to own the city. Martell just refused to show up, like a tax auditor dodging a cash-only restaurant. And Jacques? Jacques was a one-man backstage senate. Rick took one look, did the math, and said, this guy's gonna argue with God at the pearly gates. He didn't scream, didn't fight, didn't play dirt sheet theater. He iced you with silence, left you chasing your own shadow, and sprayed that arrogance like it came with a restraining order. This wasn't pettiness, it was professional euthanasia. And that's why Rick Martell's name still smells clean, while these three still stink of receipts, politics, and what-ifs. If this breakdown hit harder than a Zenk promo flopping in Milwaukee, do the right thing. Like sub and ring that bell like you're trying to get Jacques to shut up mid-politic. We're digging up real heat, real feuds, and real backstage beef. No kayfabe, no safe takes. Hit that button before Martell ghost sprays you from beyond the mirror. You don't want to be next on the list. Most wrestlers leave behind a trail of broken chairs and burnt bridges. Not Lanny Poffo. The guy wore a graduation cap and read poems, but the only test he ever failed was holding a grudge of his own. That's because his whole life became one giant tribute act to Randy Savage's hatred. He didn't live to get even, he lived to stay loyal. This ain't your usual top 5 hate list. Lanny didn't slash tires or slap people in catering. What he did do? Spent 30 years throwing verbal elbows at the people Randy couldn't stand. Vince McMahon, WWC's Hall of Fame committee, and anyone who disrespected the House of Poffo. He was like Randy's beef courier. Next day delivery. No signature required. So today, we ain't clowning on who Lanny hated. We're breaking down who Lanny hated on behalf of his brother. Let's get into it. Randy Savage and Vince McMahon had a relationship messier than a wrestling promo gone off script. Randy left WWF in May '94, but Lanny Poffo had already bounced out earlier that year, so he wasn't exactly backstage holding Randy's coat. That said, Lanny never let the family beef die. He was the designated Poffo grudge carrier, keeping Randy's hatred alive long after the Slim Jims stopped flying in the ring. Vince disrespected Randy with Hall of Fame snubs and backstage politics, and Lanny made sure no forgiveness was on the menu. He flat out refused WWE's Hall of Fame offers for years, saying, "If Randy said no, I say no. That's loyalty, not convenience." Like a man who turned down a free steak dinner at a vegan convention, Vince could have booked the moon landing live on Raw, and Lanny would still have waved it off with a poem about broken promises. When Randy died in 2011, Vince suddenly remembered the Poffo name, but Lanny smelled the PR smoke from a mile away. Only when Vince agreed to induct the whole Poffo family in 2015 did Lanny finally step back in the ring, figuratively speaking. So yeah, Randy threw Slim Jims and stank up arenas. Lanny threw shade and sonnets. If wrestling had an Olympic event for Hall of Fame holdouts, Bruno Sammartino would be the Michael Phelps. Gold medals stacked higher than The Rock's eyebrow. Bruno treated WWE's Hall like it was a bad Tinder date he couldn't swipe away for decades. He finally showed up in 2013 after giving Vince enough ghosting to fill a horror movie. Now, Lanny Poffo's Hall of Fame story isn't about dragging his feet for attention. No, this guy was like the family's Hall of Fame bouncer, telling WWE, "You want one Poffo? You get the whole Poffo, no partials, no piecemeal nonsense." For years, Vince tried to slide in the Hall of Fame with just Randy. Lanny shut that down like a bouncer at a nightclub catching VIPs, trying to sneak in their cousin's friend. He refused every solo invite like they were spam emails with no subject line. The dude held the door tight, waiting for Vince to respect Angelo Poffo, the dad, the legend, and Randy's first big fan. That was the price of admission. This wasn't stubbornness. This was family loyalty so fierce it could choke a snake. Lanny wasn't about to let WWE rewrite the Poffo story like it was a bad episode of Family Feud. When WWE finally caved in 2015 and inducted the whole Poffo crew, Lanny stepped up, but not without a side-eye sharper than Ric Flair's robe. He made sure Vince knew this was on Randy's terms, and anyone thinking otherwise could eat the turnbuckle. So Bruno's slow walk was a legend, but Lanny, he was the bouncer who made sure no Poffo got in unless the whole family rolled deep. Slim Jim was the macho man's cash cow. That neon meat stick didn't just ride Randy's coattails, it clung to his tassels like barbecue-flavored Velcro. But when Savage jumped ship to WCW in 1994, he took Slim Jim with him, and that wasn't just a business move, that was a knife in Vince's marketing department. See, Slim Jim wasn't some cute side hustle, it was millions of dollars. Vince had built a whole chunk of WWE's 90s marketing around those commercials. And when the checks stopped coming, Vince allegedly blamed Randy like he'd walked out of Titan Towers, carrying a briefcase full of beef jerky money. Lanny Poffo repeated it for years. That Slim Jim deal meant more to Vince than you can imagine. When Randy took it with him, they took it personally. And Slim Jim wasn't dumb, they knew Randy was the brand. When he showed up in WCW, they followed faster than a valet with your keys. The whole thing wasn't just a financial loss, it was a public embarrassment. Vince got outmaneuvered in plain sight. Lanny believed that was the moment Vince wrote Randy off. Not when he left, not when he bashed him, but when he cost Vince that spicy meat money. From then on, Savage was frozen out of WWE. No cameos, no DVDs, not even a Legends deal. The guy went from icon to unperson overnight. Now, Lanny kept telling that story like it was gospel. Vince doesn't forgive beef theft. When you strip it down, this wasn't about commercials. It was about power. And when Randy took that Slim Jim contract with him, he didn't just cut a deal, he bit into Vince's ego and snapped it like a twig. This is the part where Lanny Poffo stopped being the genius and started sounding like he was ready to stab someone with a laminated Hall of Fame plaque. See, Angelo Poffo wasn't just Randy's dad, he was a goddamn war vet, record holder, promoter, and the architect of ICW, a company Vince couldn't buy, so he buried it like a body in Stamford. This man did 6,000 sit-ups in one go, and WWE treated him like he couldn't do 6 push-ups without needing CPR. To Vince McMahon, Angelo was an outlaw, which is wrestling speak for he ran a promotion I didn't control, so let's act like he never existed. They gave Drew Carey a Hall of Fame ring before they even acknowledged Angelo's existence. You hear that? They honored a Price is Right host before they honored the guy who raised Macho Man Randy Savage. That's not disrespect. That's hate mail in a tuxedo. Lanny wasn't having it. He went on every shoot interview like a one-man army, torching bridges that were already on fire. Every time WWE reached out, Lanny told him the same thing. You want Randy in? Then Angelo's going in too. Otherwise, go jump in the Stamford River with a Slim Jim up your nose. And when WWE finally begged him to do the solo induction in 2015, Lanny caved under pressure, but not without dragging the company like they owed him rent. He got on that stage like he was delivering a TED Talk from hell. No tears, no hugging Triple H, just a calculated middle finger hidden inside a tribute speech. He said Angelo on that mic like it was a damn protest chant. Vince probably sat backstage twitching like someone just set fire to a pile of NDAs. Let's be clear, Lanny didn't forgive. He got even in public. And the fans clapped, not for WWE, but because, for once, the truth slipped past their corporate gag order. They put Coco Beware in the Hall of Fame. They also put a lot more who were way more or less deserving into the Hall of Fame. So why not Randy? But Angelo Poffo, still banned like he tried to sell bootleg Hulkamania shirts in Vince's driveway, You don't have to be a genius to do that math. That's not a Hall of Fame. It's a grudge museum. Lanny Poffo wasn't some washed-up nostalgia act begging for crumbs. He was a man on a mission, swinging for ghosts and dragging receipts behind him like chains. He watched WWE disrespect his father, blackball his brother, and then pretend it never happened. And when they came calling, all smiles and suits, Lanny showed up like a man attending his enemy's wedding, just to object. He didn't want applause. He wanted accountability. He didn't crave fame. He craved justice. While every yes-man backstage lined up to kiss the ring, Lanny walked in quoting Shakespeare and calling bull like a professor with tenure. Vince gave Hall of Fame rings to talk show hosts and jobber mascots, but Angelo? He couldn't even get mentioned in a legacy video. That's not a mistake. That's malice with a suit and tie. Lanny didn't light a fire to be seen. He lit it to keep his family's name warm in a company that left it out in the cold. And when the final bell rang, Lanny didn't need validation. He already knew the truth. He wasn't there to forgive. He was there to remember what they tried to erase. Rest in peace, genius. You didn't just speak, you scorched. If that lit a fire under your folding chair, hit that like button harder than Lanny hit Vince with the truth. Subscribe for more real-deal wrestling beef. No kayfabe, no fluff, just the grudges they tried to hide. This ain't nostalgia, it's a reckoning. Stick around, because the next legend we dig up might have buried more careers than creative ever did. Thanks for watching. Scott Steiner doesn't hate people quietly, he doesn't do subtle, he doesn't forgive, and he definitely doesn't move on. When this man decides he hates you, he opens his mouth and hell comes out in stereo. Steiner is the only guy in pro wrestling history who cut shoot promos in airports. He's like if a protein shake grew teeth and started issuing death threats. Some wrestlers talk shit on Twitter. Scott calls you a punk bitch to your face, then suplexes your luggage. If you worked with him and pissed him off, that wasn't a grudge, that was a damn lifestyle. He held on to hate like it was HGH. Inject it, flex it, scream about it on a radio show 12 years later. These unlucky bastards didn't just cross Big Papa Pump. They lived rent-free in his roid-rage skull for decades. This isn't about kayfabe or fake rivalries. This is confirmed shoot heat, fists thrown, death threats issued, lawyers called, and families traumatized. When Scott Steiner hates you, there's no arc, no redemption, no handshake. Just rage, suplexes, and a goddamn restraining order. Strap in. Let's count down the 5 motherfuckers Scott Steiner hated the most. Scott Steiner once said, "If you didn't kiss ass, you didn't get pushed, and I don't kiss no ass." Scott Steiner hated DDP like chiropractors hate WebMD. From day one in WCW, he thought Paige was a phony, a self-promoting clout vampire who used networking and neck hugs to climb the card. While Scott was squatting Buicks and throwing people like sacks of drywall, DDP was out here smiling like a politician with hemorrhoids. DDP started late in the business, broke in as a manager, and spent his early years doing commentary in Zubaz pants. Steiner saw that and immediately thought, here comes this motherfucker pretending he belongs in my locker room. Scott was a college wrestling stud, an actual athlete with a gas tank full of pure meat rage. Paige was a motivational speaker with a mullet and a mailing list. The real heat came in WCW's late 90s chaos. DDP was rising up the card, getting pushed like a second-coming savior. Steiner believed it wasn't because of fan reactions, but because DDP was allegedly tight with Eric Bischoff, and, of course, married to Kimberly, a woman the boys joked had more booking power than half the agents. Paige called it hard work, Steiner called it politics. In 2000, the backstage tension finally went nuclear. A legit shoot fight broke out between them. DDP didn't swing at first. Rookie mistake. He assumed Scott was working an angle. Steiner wasn't. He was swinging like he was in the UFC and owed money. Rick Steiner and Fit Finlay had to jump in before DDP got turned into a chalk outline. Paige's only offense was shock and regret. After that, the beef never cooled. DDP tried to be civil. Scott went scorched earth. In interviews, Steiner said Paige wouldn't have made it without Kimberly's knees, and dismissed DDP yoga as stretching for guys who like to get stretched in prison. And that was him being polite. To this day, DDP still speaks kindly of Steiner, which is wild considering Scott once threatened to rip his goatee off with a forklift. But that's the Paige difference. Positivity, forgiveness, and pretending like Scott Steiner didn't try to suplex him into a fucking tombstone. He's a piece of shit with a spray tan and a wig. Scott Steiner. Scott Steiner didn't just hate Hulk Hogan, he rejected his whole existence. The tan, the politics, the promos, the fake-ass Jesus act. Steiner thought it was all horseshit. Hogan was the king of the wrestling mountain, and Scott wanted to drop-kick him off it while pissing down the cliff. Their hate hit nuclear in TNA, but the roots go back to WCW, where Hogan was pulling his usual strings like a puppet master with biceps. Scott said Hogan used creative control to bury guys and freeze pushes like a backstage glacier. "You couldn't get over unless Hulk let you," Steiner said, and he didn't let anyone, unless your name was Hulk. But Steiner's rage wasn't just about career roadblocks, it was personal. In 2015, Hogan's ex-wife claimed Scott threatened her at an airport, allegedly saying he'd kill Hulk if he showed up at the Hall of Fame. That's not a shoot promo. That's a line from a true crime documentary. Hogan took it so seriously, he filed a police report and got a restraining order. That's how real this shit was. Scott Steiner had to legally promise not to murder Hulk Hogan at a red carpet event. On the mic, Scott never held back. He called Hogan a cancer to the business, a racist sack of orange skin, and told fans that Hulk's legacy was built on burying better wrestlers and selling vitamins to idiots. When Hogan's racist comments leaked in 2015, Scott didn't say, "I told you so." He screamed it on every platform that would let him yell with a wireless mic. In TNA, they had to be physically separated. The office knew if Steiner and Hogan crossed paths, it wouldn't end with a promo. It'd end with EMTs and paperwork. Steiner even challenged Hogan to a real fight. Anytime, anywhere. Let's see what that fake hip can do when I snap it in half. The hate was one-sided and absolute. Hogan, ever the PR machine, didn't respond. Maybe because he was afraid, or maybe because when a man says he'll kill you at baggage claim, it's not worth testing the theory. Scott Steiner hated Ric Flair like a bodybuilder hates salad. To him, Flair was a cosplay legend. All robe, no rope. Steiner didn't see a 16-time world champion. He saw a 60-year-old man strutting around like a drunk Vegas magician who just discovered mirror selfies. The heat was both personal and professional. Steiner thought Flair was a politicking relic who sabotaged younger guys to stay relevant. He buried everyone he could to keep his spot, Scott said. He's a jealous old bastard in love with his own reflection. And this wasn't internet gossip. This was Scott yelling it into every mic shoved near his face. In WCW, Steiner openly trashed Flair during interviews and sometimes in the middle of matches. He once screamed, "Ric Flair sucks," during a live promo, threw his notes, and stormed off the set. Flair, trying to be diplomatic, responded with backstage silence. Steiner took that as permission to keep swinging. "He hides behind his legacy," he said, "but I ain't scared of no legacy. I'll beat that shit into a footnote." Flair's mic skills? Scott called it karaoke. Flair's Four Horsemen legacy? Scott said they were a group of jack-offs who drank and circle-jerked to their own promos. He even mocked Flair's heart problems, saying he's only still alive because he's too stubborn to die. The real low point? When Flair's son Reed passed away, Scott still didn't hold back. He dragged Rick publicly for allegedly using his kid's death for sympathy. "He's a piece of shit before and after," Scott said. "I don't care if the whole family drops. He's still a phony." It was unforgivable, disgusting, and pure, undistilled Scott Steiner. The hatred never died. When Flair retired for the fourth time, Steiner said, "Good. Hope he takes a dirt nap this time." That's not a roast. That's someone who wants your funeral catered. Steiner didn't want Ric Flair fired. He wanted him erased. Scott Steiner didn't just dislike Triple H. He thought of him as wrestling's ultimate trust fund baby. To Scott, Hunter was a guy who rode Daddy's coattails so hard he should have gotten a job in accounting instead of main eventing. Steiner saw Triple H as a corporate puppet, too busy playing kingmaker to actually wrestle like a real athlete. The backstage vibe was icy. Hunter was part of the infamous clique, a tight clique known for calling shots and locking out outsiders. Scott wasn't in that club, and he knew it. He openly said Triple H's push was less about talent and more about who he knew, and that if you weren't part of the club, you might as well be invisible. In interviews, Steiner mocked Triple H's game face, calling it the expression of someone who just realized they have to go to a boring board meeting after lunch. Steiner also ripped Hunter's in-ring style, calling it methodical but soulless, like watching a robot put on a suit. Their personal beef wasn't just about business either. Scott once claimed that Hunter used his backstage power to bury guys he didn't like, and that he was a snake hiding behind a leather jacket and millions of dollars. Despite that, Steiner respected Hunter's ability to get the job done, begrudgingly. "He knows how to play the game," Scott said. "But I'm not playing Monopoly here, this is wrestling. You want to be the king? Wrestle like one." Behind the scenes, these two barely spoke. If they crossed paths, it was all cold stares and unspoken challenges. Scott Steiner hated Triple H, the way you hate that guy at work who schedules pointless Zoom calls. Vince is a liar, a thief, and a clown in a suit who ruined pro wrestling. Scott Steiner. Scott Steiner didn't just hate Vince McMahon. He considered him the devil in a three-piece suit, a man who smiled while wrecking everything Scott loved about the business. And unlike other guys who grumbled in interviews, Steiner said it loud, often, and with no fear of lawsuits. The moment he left WWE, Steiner burned the bridge with a flamethrower and then dumped gasoline on the ashes. Vince doesn't care about wrestling, Scott said. He cares about control. He wants to own your name, your body, and your soul, like some weird billionaire version of the Grinch. The beef started during Scott's short, uncomfortable WWE run in 2002. Vince brought him in with huge hype, and then instantly booked him like a winded afterthought. Bad matches, weird promos, no direction. Steiner said the whole thing was sabotage. He just wanted the name, not the talent, Scott said. Vince is a businessman, not a wrestling man. That's the problem. Things got worse when the WWE sent Scott a wellness policy letter asking him to submit a drug test, even though he wasn't under contract. Steiner went off, calling it harassment and threatening to sue. "I'm not your employee," he said. "You don't get to treat me like I'm on a leash." Scott never came back, and he never let go. He blamed Vince for the death of the WCW, for killing tag team wrestling, for turning pro wrestling into a circus for bodybuilders who can't wrestle but smile good. Steiner even blamed Vince for poisoning the next generation. "You got these guys doing scripted promos like robots," he said. "Nobody's allowed to be real anymore. Vince wants clones, not wrestlers." When WWE eventually inducted Steiner into the Hall of Fame via the Steiner brothers, Scott kept his speech short. No tears, no thank yous, no Vince. Just a cold stare and a quiet mic, like he was holding back a truth bomb. Scott never worked for Vince. He survived him. Scott Steiner never forgave, never forgot, and never shut up. While most wrestlers aged into polite old-timer status, Scott aged like a steak left on a radiator. Loud, spoiled, and somehow still jacked. These five, they didn't just get on his nerves. They moved in, wrecked the place, and left him growling into a microphone 20 years later. In a world full of backstage smiles and fake respect, Scott Steiner stayed mad, stayed loud, and stayed absolutely terrifying. He wasn't playing the game. He was flipping the board, suplexing the referee, and trash-talking the guy who bought the table. And if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and drop a comment before Steiner finds your address. Ric Flair didn't just live the gimmick, he was the gimmick. Rolex, robe, and razor blade tongue. The man cut deeper backstage than he ever did in the ring. If he didn't like you, you felt it. If he hated you, your career felt it too. And Flair hated hard. This wasn't petty locker room gossip. This was decade-spanning venom, real grudges, and microphone snipes with teeth. Flair made enemies the way most people make small talk. Loudly, flamboyantly, and with the full force of a pissed-off peacock in a $1,000 suit. These are the five poor bastards he hated the most, and he made sure they knew it. Teddy Long didn't just cross Ric Flair's radar, he got steamrolled by it. This wasn't wrestling heat, this was racism dressed in a Rolex. In shoot interviews, Teddy described one of the most disgusting real-life moments of his early career in Jim Crockett Promotions. According to Long, Ric Flair walked up to me one time and said, using the N-word first, and asked me, "You like working here?" That wasn't a promo. That wasn't a bit. That was Flair's actual mouth, casually weaponizing slurs at a young black referee trying to survive in the old-school South. The hate wasn't subtle. It was hostile, aggressive, and systemic. Flair never apologized, never clarified, and never corrected. He just strutted off like racism was part of the gimmick. Teddy? He started carrying a knife backstage. Gary Hart gave it to him. When a man literally gives you a blade to protect yourself from the locker room leader, that's not tension. That's war. Years later, Long still speaks openly about the experience, but Flair? Dead silence. No denial, no remorse. Flair didn't just hate Teddy Long, he made it clear he didn't want him in the business. That's the kind of hate that doesn't come from competition or booking politics, it comes from the ugliest place a man can speak from. And in Flair's mind, he was justified. The robe didn't hide the venom. He saw Teddy Long as beneath him, both professionally and racially, and that grudge never melted over time. It just aged, like Flair. bitter, toxic, and stuck in the past. Ric Flair hated Bruno Sammartino like an aging mobster hates the guy who ran the numbers before him, because people still respected him. Flair never hid it. He thought Bruno was boring, stiff, and protected by Vince Sr.'s favoritism like a baby in a bulletproof bassinet. In a 2008 shoot on The Voice, Flair said it straight. Bruno Sammartino was a great performer in the Northeast, but outside of New York, he couldn't draw a dime. He said that with the confidence of a man who never main evented Madison Square Garden during the golden years. Bruno packed the Garden over 180 times. Flair, he packed a bar tab and a suitcase full of alimony. Flair mocked Bruno's refusal to join the WWF Hall of Fame under Vince Jr., calling him bitter and washed up. Meanwhile, Bruno publicly blasted Flair's partying, womanizing, and ego. But Flair didn't just defend himself, he hit back first. Flair went out of his way in interviews and his own book to label Bruno a regional act who was nothing without New York. That's like calling Elvis just a local act from Memphis. Flair saw Bruno as a relic and a threat. Because Bruno stood for work ethic and discipline, Flair stood for martinis and blade jobs. And unlike some rivalries where hate mellowed over time, Flair still throws shade decades later. No reconciliation, no softened legacy, just Flair doing what he does best, pissing on your gravestone while yelling, "Woo!" Shane Douglas wasn't just another mid-carder to Ric Flair. He was a personal punchline, a constant reminder Flair's throne wasn't unchallenged. Flair publicly buried Douglas in shoot interviews and even slipped shade during WCW promos, calling him a never-was who didn't deserve his spot. According to Douglas, Flair gave me generic praise like a dude who's too busy to even pay attention. Shane Douglas on Flair's cold shoulder. That's like asking your boss if your project's any good and getting, "Yeah, sure," while he's scrolling Instagram. Flair's disdain was the kind that crushes careers, not subtle but venomous. Flair's hatred wasn't just backstage bitterness. He wielded his status to block Shane's rise, undermining Douglas's push in WCW, forcing Shane to build his legacy elsewhere. Hello, ECW. Douglas's shoot promos calling Flair out didn't help, but Flair thrived on the fuel, doubling down with digs in his autobiography. This wasn't just professional jealousy. Flair saw Douglas as a threat to his legacy and shoved him off the throne like an entitled monarch. Flair didn't just hate the guy, he acted on it. And Flair's lasting verdict? Shane Douglas never really made it. For Rick, that was justice served cold. Ric Flair hated Bret Hart with the kind of passion usually reserved for Canadian hockey players and polite apologies. Flair saw Bret as a stiff, overrated, and insufferably self-righteous workhorse who couldn't sell a figure four if his life depended on it. In Flair's world, Bret was the guy who wrestled like he was still trying to impress his dad. And frankly, Flair wasn't buying it. In his shoot interviews and book, Flair dismissed Bret's legacy repeatedly, calling him too predictable and a good wrestler with no charisma. Flair's low-key message: Bret was the least exciting main eventer ever to lace boots. Flair's disdain went beyond words. He cut Bret off at every turn, backstage meetings and TV promos. Flair once told a friend that Bret just can't carry the load, and was jealous of Flair's spotlight. Bret's infamous Montreal screwjob probably didn't help, but Flair's contempt dated back long before. Basically, Flair viewed Bret as a talented nerd who wore the wrong glasses and didn't know how to play the game. Flair hated how Bret embodied the very thing Flair despised, a guy who cared more about respect and technique than the spotlight and swagger. Flair's real beef with Bret was a clash of philosophies. Flair was the peacock, Bret was the librarian, and peacocks don't like librarians. Ric Flair hated Scott Steiner the way a refined wine snob hates boxed wine, loud, obnoxious, and best kept in the back of the store. Flair saw Steiner as the walking embodiment of wrestling's worst excesses: big muscles, tiny brains, and zero class. Flair's exact words in his autobiography and interviews boiled down to Steiner's a loudmouth dumbass who couldn't cut a promo without sounding like a busted blender. Steiner's Big Papa Pump gimmick might have sold merch, but Flair thought it was the wrestling equivalent of a frat boy screaming in a library. Annoying, distracting, and borderline embarrassing. Flair openly mocked Steiner's promo skills, saying he sounded like a caveman who found a microphone, and that his wrestling style was all brawn, no brains. But Flair's hate went deeper than just style. Steiner's backstage reputation for being a bully and an egomaniac clashed with Flair's own ruthless brand of politics. Flair saw Steiner as a loud, immature kid who didn't deserve the spotlight he was grabbing. When Flair called Steiner a piece of shit in interviews, he wasn't joking. It was pure contempt. Flair's disdain was so raw, it turned public whenever they crossed paths. Flair basically wanted Steiner gone, or at least muted. In the Royal Court of Wrestling, Steiner was the loud drunk who ruined the party, and Flair was ready to slap him down every time. If Flair was the peacock king of wrestling, Steiner was the drunken turkey trying to steal the show, and Flair wasn't having any of it. When a legend like Ric Flair hates you, it's not some petty office spat. It's nuclear backstage warfare. This isn't about who got the biggest push or who sold the most tickets. It's about a man who made careers and crushed them with the flick of a wrist, a whisper, or a sideways glance dripping with contempt. The hate wasn't casual. It was personal. It was ruthless. It was the kind of venom that leaves scars on reputations, careers, and egos that no amount of sequins or shouting, "Woo!" can cover up. These 5 men weren't just disliked, they were targets, marked by a king who saw them as threats, weaknesses, or simply unworthy of the throne. And Flair's legacy? It's built as much on the grudges he carried as the championships he hoarded. So, when you hear the "woo" echo in the arena, remember it's not just a celebration, it's a warning. Cross the Peacock King and you're signing up for a lifetime of shade, backhanded insults, and the kind of hatred that outlives the final bell. And that's the real Ric Flair story, equal parts legend and ruthless son of a bitch. If you like this, smash that like, subscribe for more real backstage heat, and stick around, because wrestling's real drama isn't on TV, it's in the locker room, and I'm here to bring you every last dirty secret. Butch Reed didn't play politics. He played football, threw forearms, and ran through locker rooms like he was still wearing shoulder pads. You weren't getting fake smiles or backstage hugs from Reed. If he didn't like you, you'd know. If you got booked over him, he remembered. If you were Vince McMahon, well, let's just say the Natural had some unnatural thoughts about your booking decisions. This is the story of a man who body-slammed careers and burned bridges like he was paid per flame. No gimmicks, no kayfabe, just 5 real wrestlers Butch Reed couldn't stand. And yeah, they earned it. Butch Reed and Road Warrior Hawk. Picture 2 bulls in a china shop, except neither gave a damn about the china. They just wanted to smash each other's egos instead. Hawk wasn't exactly the warmest guy backstage. He had the personality of a hangry bear and the subtlety of a freight train. Reed found Hawk's constant attitude and abrasive nature impossible to stomach. According to shoot interviews and accounts from folks backstage, Hawk had a way of bulldozing everyone's vibe. He was the guy who'd snap at you for something minor and then act like you were the problem for reacting. Reed, a guy who took pride in respect and professionalism, didn't take kindly to that nonsense. Hawk's style in the ring was aggressive, sure, but backstage, he was known for being blunt to the point of rudeness, and that rubbed Reed the wrong way. The real kicker? Reed was all about being a solid, dependable pro. Hawk? Less about teamwork, more about me first, which put them at odds. In a business where locker rooms can get as hostile as the ring, Reed didn't want to babysit someone who acted like a prima donna. Reed's hate was less about violence and more about Hawk's consistent disregard for the respect other wrestlers tried to maintain. And the irony? Both were beasts in the ring, but their backstage chemistry was about as toxic as a radioactive dump. Reed thought Hawk's attitude was a liability, a waste of potential, and wasn't shy about saying it in shoot interviews. It's like putting a lion and a cobra in the same cage. Survival depends on one or the other going down. For Reed, Hawk was just a bad roommate with a bad attitude. Butch Reed hated Dusty Rhodes like you hate a telemarketer who won't stop calling even after you've yelled at them to go die in a hole. Dusty was that guy who strutted into the locker room like he owned the joint. Spoiler, he kinda did. But Reed wasn't buying the everyman hero act. To Reed, Dusty was less of a dream and more like a recurring nightmare who thought creative control meant, do whatever I want, screw the rest of you. Dusty Rhodes was wrestling's greatest storyteller, but backstage? Man, that story was full of potholes and punchlines, mostly at Butch Reed's expense. Reed and Rhodes had more clashes than a bad reality TV reunion. The dream wasn't just laying pipe in promos, he was laying into Reed over creative control like a mama bear guarding her cubs. Reed wanted serious say in his character and booking. Rhodes, ever the I'm the voice of the locker room type, treated Reed like a guest star who forgot his lines. According to shoot interviews, Reed felt Rhodes constantly undermined him, doing the wrestling equivalent of mansplaining while telling Reed how to act in his own matches. And don't get me started on Rhodes' ego. Reed said, Dusty acted like he was the king of the castle, but all I saw was a guy who wanted to keep the spotlight for himself. He'd toss you crumbs and expect a standing ovation. Classic Rhodes, giving out scraps but acting like he was feeding the whole damn kingdom. Their beef boiled over because Dusty controlled the creative flow and wasn't exactly the most inclusive guy. If you didn't fit the Dream's vision, you got the cold shoulder, and Reed was firmly outside the velvet rope. In the end, Reed respected Dusty's talent, but hated playing second fiddle in Dusty's storyline, even if it meant losing sleep over it. That backstage drama wasn't kayfabe. It was real bruised egos and bruised ribs, all mixed with a healthy dose of who's the real American dream. Reed wasn't dreaming. It was more like a nightmare. Ric Flair walks into a locker room like he owns the damn place, which, let's be honest, half the time he probably thought he did. Butch Reed hated Flair's backstage swagger so much it was like watching a peacock strut into a lion's den. Reed called Flair out for being that guy. The dude who hogs the mic, the spotlight, and apparently all the mirrors. Reed once said, Flair acted like the world revolved around him, like he was the sun and the rest of us were just planets stuck in his orbit. Which is funny because Reed wasn't about to be an extra in Flair's solar system. Flair's ego was so inflated, you'd think he was airlifting his own hair. Seriously, the guy spent more time primping backstage than a teenager on Instagram. But here's the kicker. Flair could back up his big mouth with skill, which made Reed's frustration double. It's like getting punched by a guy who's also narrating the whole thing in slow motion. Reed admitted, he's a great wrestler, but his attitude? It was like sharing a room with a guy who thinks he invented breathing. Brutal, but true. And Flair's penchant for locker room politics? Legendary. Reed wasn't buying it. Flair's buddy-buddy deals meant Reed was often left scratching his head, wondering why he was on the chopping block while Flair sashayed to the top. You could say Reed's relationship with Flair was less woo and more no. In the wrestling world, Flair was a king. Backstage, to Reed, he was just the biggest drama queen with the best robes. Jim Cornette and Butch Reed's beef was the kind of backstage drama that didn't need a storyline. It was pure real-life shoot heat, like two guys trapped in a room with nowhere to hide. Cornette never managed Reed, so forget any manager versus wrestler cliches. Their conflict was all about Cornette's big mouth and his knack for stirring shit up in the locker room. Cornette was infamous for cutting people down with brutal, unapologetic honesty, and Reed was a frequent target. Reed recalled multiple shoot interviews where Cornette criticized his wrestling style and professionalism so harshly it was like getting roasted on national TV, except it happened backstage every day. Cornette acted like he owned the place and the right to judge everybody else's work. But really, he was just a guy shouting from the cheap seats, Reed said with a mix of frustration and disdain. What made this beef extra toxic was Cornette's backstage influence. He wasn't just some loudmouth ranting to himself. He had enough backstage pull to sway booking decisions. Reed felt like Cornette's negative opinions sometimes kept him buried on the card, which only fueled the resentment. It wasn't just words, it was power disguised as criticism. Reed saw Cornette as a locker room poison, someone who thrived on drama and division. Cornette's rants could turn a locker room into a war zone, and Reed wasn't about to be collateral damage. Their clashes weren't about kayfabe or scripted rivalries. They were raw, unfiltered backstage hatred with no punches pulled. At the end of the day, it wasn't about Cornette managing Reed. It was about two alpha personalities who couldn't stand each other, and Cornette's relentless jab-jabbing made sure Reed knew it every time he stepped through the curtain. Vince McMahon wasn't just the boss. To Butch Reed, he was the reason the Natural never got the push he deserved. Reed saw Vince like a gatekeeper with a chip on his shoulder, especially when it came to pushing black talent. According to multiple shoot interviews and Reed's own words, Vince's booking decisions left Reed feeling like a glorified extra in his own career. Reed once blasted Vince in a shoot interview. Vince didn't care about me. He'd rather push some pretty boy with a smile than a damn good worker who could bring heat. Harsh, but Reed wasn't alone in that opinion. Plenty of backstage sources confirmed Vince's tendency to favor certain wrestlers while leaving others to stew in mediocrity. Reed's frustration boiled over because he felt stifled creatively. The Natural was all about intensity and authenticity, but Vince wanted safe, marketable faces. Reed wasn't safe, and he paid the price. In Vince's world, Reed was just a guy who punched harder than he was pushed. And let's not forget the racial politics. Reed wasn't subtle about calling out the company's lack of serious black main eventers, and Vince didn't handle those critiques well. It created a toxic backstage atmosphere, with Reed on one side and Vince's corporate machine on the other. Bottom line, Reed respected McMahon's empire, but he hated being the forgotten cog in it. The boss's decisions left Reed bitter, bruised, and booked nowhere near where he belonged. So there you have it, 5 unlucky bastards who found themselves on the wrong side of a man who didn't care about politics, favors, or feelings. This wasn't some scripted drama where everyone shakes hands after. This was real backstage warfare where grudges lasted longer than careers, and respect was earned with bruises, not promos. These guys learned the hard way that being talented wasn't enough when egos clashed and power plays ruled the roost. The heat was so thick you could cut it with a knife. And it wasn't just talk, it was fighting words, silent treatments, and bookings that felt like a punch in the gut. In this brutal wrestling jungle, luck was the one thing none of these fools had. They got burned, buried, and blasted by a man who made sure they never forgot it. And that, my friends, is the real story behind the curtain. Raw, savage, and 100% unfiltered. If you want more backstage shoot heat served cold and hard, smash that like, slam subscribe, and hit the bell like you're calling a referee for a no DQ match. Stay ready, because the real fight is always backstage. Thanks for watching. You know how people say, I got fired for telling the truth? No, you didn't. You got fired because you were a dick and didn't shut up about your paycheck. That's what happened to Kevin Wackles, aka Nailz, the only human being in recorded history dumb enough to pick a real fight with Big Boss Man. A guy whose whole personality was, don't fuck with me, or I'll hit you with a stick and not apologize. Ray Traylor wasn't a loudmouth, wasn't a politician, and wasn't a stooge. He was a pro. And Nailz? Nailz assaulted Vince McMahon, got fired, and then blamed Boss Man like it was some elaborate Cobb County conspiracy. This wasn't heat. This was one guy freebasing delusion while the other guy quietly collected his check and walked away like a grown-up. This is the only real-life beef Big Boss Man ever had, and somehow he still came out looking polite. In Nailz' head, this was a gritty underdog story. A man wrongfully imprisoned by a gimmick cop, clawing his way through the system, finally standing up to the man. Except the man wasn't Boss Man, it was Vince. And Nailz decided the best way to get justice was to physically assault his boss during a pay dispute. Yeah, real smart. The kind of decision you'd expect from a guy who cut promos like he just swallowed a garbage disposal. He thought Boss Man was in on it, like Ray Traylor had some secret hotline to Vince's bank account. Nailz claimed Boss Man was a stooge, a backstage rat, and kissing up to the office. Meanwhile, Ray was probably just trying to get home to Georgia and not stab someone with a plastic tray of catering chicken. This wasn't heat. It was paranoia with a gym membership. Jim Cornette once said, Ray Traylor was the nicest guy in the world. Nailz? That guy was fucking nuts. The problem was, Nailz couldn't separate storyline from real life. He thought Boss Man was out to get him because he pretended to beat him on TV. That's like yelling at your actor dad because he killed your mom in a soap opera. It's called a script. Genius. This was the moment the wrestling locker room collectively realized Nailz wasn't just in character. Nailz was the character. He was the angry ex-con who didn't get paid enough and blamed the only guy in the room who still had a job. Meanwhile, Boss Man didn't say a word. No shoot interview, no receipts, no drama. Just stood there while Nailz burned every bridge like a guy who thought arson was a personality trait. It was December 1992, Green Bay, Wisconsin. Nailz storms into Vince McMahon's office over a payout dispute. He's pissed. He thinks he's getting underpaid, disrespected, probably underappreciated for all the grunting and snarling he's doing on TV. And instead of using words or lawyers or literally any adult behavior, Nailz does the one thing guaranteed to make HR get out a taser. He puts his hands on the boss. Sources vary. Some say he choked Vince. Others say he shoved him so hard he flew backward into his chair like a deleted scene from The Office, Special Victims Unit. Either way, Nailz flipped his entire career upside down in about 17 seconds. And while security dragged him out, screaming about being screwed over, he took one last shot. Big Boss Man's a stooge. That was it. That was the line. That was the moment. This wasn't about money anymore. Nailz just turned it into a full-blown conspiracy. In his mind, Big Boss Man had snitched, ratted him out, sold him down the river like they were in an actual prison drama. Reality? Ray Traylor wasn't even in the room. You know what Ray did after all that? Nothing. He didn't get involved, didn't clap back, didn't even give a shoot interview. The guy probably finished his catering plate and asked when his next segment was. Because, unlike Nailz, Boss Man had a career to protect, and enough self-awareness to know when to shut the fuck up. So what really happened? One man lost his shit, committed career suicide, and blamed the nearest big guy in blue. The other man did what a real pro does, stayed quiet, got paid, and lived to swing that nightstick another day. You ever see a guy destroy his entire career, reputation, and future because he didn't like his paycheck? That's Nailz. This dude walked into Vince's office, didn't like the number he saw on the envelope, and instead of negotiating like a human being, he yeeted his own career into a wood chipper. Like, Nailz thought he was owed more. Okay, everyone in wrestling thinks they're underpaid. That's the industry. Welcome to the carny circus. You don't get a raise by assaulting the ringmaster. You get a lawsuit. Nailz goes in thinking he's about to cut a promo, and ends up cutting his own throat. And after he strangles him, he screams that Big Boss Man is a stooge, like somehow Ray Traylor is responsible for him getting paid in expired Arby's coupons. Ray, who was probably in the other room trying not to fart in his flak jacket. That's not a lawsuit. That's a cry for help with a bodybuilder accent. And what did Boss Man do? Absolutely nothing. Guy didn't do an interview, didn't even blink. Because when you're right, you don't need to yell. You just let the other guy die in court in obscurity, which Nailz did, beautifully. Here's the biggest insult of all. Big Boss Man didn't even bother to clap back. No shoot interview, no backstage burial, no chair throwing, no screaming promo at the curtain. Just silence. That's how beneath him this whole Nailz meltdown was. Ray Traylor was old school. He handled drama the way your granddad handled your whining, with a long stare, a cigarette, and a slow walk in the opposite direction. Nailz tried to blow up the locker room, and Boss Man just kept getting paid. Nailz threw away a career. Ray Traylor upgraded to the corporation, then became Vince's personal enforcer on TV. Hell, he main evented segments with Austin and Rock. You know what Nailz was doing? Signing autographs next to Virgil in a high school gym next to the nacho machine. After getting fired for treating Vince McMahon like a crash test dummy, Nailz hit rock bottom so hard he left a crater. He tried to sue Vince for wrongful termination, even though, again, he choked the man in his own office like he was playing Mortal Kombat on cocaine. Then, in the boldest act of career suicide since Ultimate Warrior tried to hold up Vince for $500K, Nailz claimed sexual harassment. That's right. He told the court Vince McMahon touched him inappropriately. No follow-up, no details. Just, Vince tried something, as if that was going to win over a jury. Meanwhile, Ray Traylor, he just kept climbing. Became a locker room vet, got rehired, traveled the world, became a goddamn Hall of Famer. Nailz couldn't even get booked on Cameo. Nailz went from main eventing house shows with Boss Man to standing behind Buff Bagwell at indie meet and greets, trying to sell an autographed mugshot. Some bitter wrestler, probably. Here's how bad Nailz fumbled it. He beefed with a guy who wasn't even mad, turned a mid-card push into a felony charge, and then tried to sue Vince McMahon for sexual harassment with a straight face. Bro, you choked him. That's not harassment. That's, please take my career and set it on fire. And Big Boss Man? Ray Traylor didn't even respond. Not once. Because why would he? It's like yelling at a mannequin and being mad it didn't blink. Ray just went back to work, got repackaged, got paid, and moved on, the way grown-ass professionals do. He didn't get a Hall of Fame ring. You're right, because he was dead when WWE finally honored him. They inducted him posthumously in 2016, with his wife accepting. You know why? Because the man left behind something real. A legacy. Respect. Nailz left behind conspiracy theories and an expired booking fee. Nailz screaming about stooges in 1992 is like your uncle still mad about blockbuster late fees. He could have been something. He had the size, the look, the angle, but he thought the business owed him a hug instead of a handshake. And now, he's the answer to a trivia question nobody asks. Meanwhile, Boss Man's out here getting inducted by his actual family, while Nailz is still crying about justice like a guy who lost a bar fight to a jukebox. The moral? Don't start a war you ain't built to win. And definitely don't do it against a man who can no-sell your whole existence without saying a damn word. Meanwhile, Ray Traylor passed away in 2004. Too young, no victory lap, no tell-all podcast. But the people who actually knew him, they respected the hell out of him. Guys like Foley, Cornette, even Vince, who never forgets, spoke highly of the man. Ray never needed to scream. He didn't cut shoots, he just showed up, did business, and let the tantrum throwers self-destruct. And Nailz? Still bitter, still yelling, still spinning that same tired story at conventions like it's some dark secret instead of the punchline it became. Because the real truth is this: you don't get screwed in wrestling for choking the boss. You get forgotten. Boss Man got a tribute video. Nailz got a Wikipedia page with dead links and a citation needed next to the word credible. So yeah, Big Boss Man never responded. Because he didn't need to. Nailz already lost. If you liked this video, hit the like button. If you hated it, hit it twice so the algorithm knows you're an emotional wreck like Nailz. Subscribe for more shoot heat, real beef. And drop a comment if you think Nailz still tells that same boss man stooged me out story to his Uber driver. I'm here all week, unlike Nailz, who got fired once and then never came back. Smash that bell like it's Vince McMahon's throat in 1992. See you next episode. Thanks for watching. Let me explain something. Kamala was 6'7", 380 pounds of pure Mississippi muscle, painted up like a tribal ghost just to scare the white folks into buying tickets. But behind the scenes, this man got treated like the help at a barbecue he headlined. Barefoot in the cold, barely getting gas money, and every promoter smiling like, "You lucky we even booked you." Bitch, he is the show. Kamala didn't hate easy, but 4 people pushed him past his limit. 1 had him packing heat, ready to put someone in ICU. Let's talk about the ones who messed up bad. Let me tell you all something real quick. Jerry Lawler was out here running Memphis like he was the King of England and Kamala was one of his royal subjects, but without the damn health care, dental plan, or paychecks that cleared. Kamala said this man had him main eventing sold-out arenas, crowds foaming at the mouth to see the Ugandan giant eat somebody. And then backstage, Lawler was handing him an envelope like it was a church donation, like, "Here you go, brother. God bless. Don't spend all $5 in one place." Kamala didn't hate Lawler because of jealousy. Hell no. He hated him because Lawler treated him like a prop that couldn't count. Kamala said in Kamala Speaks that Lawler always made sure his own pockets were fat, while Kamala was out here barefoot, walking through parking lots colder than child support court in December. The only jungle Kamala ever got lost in was the tax bracket Jerry kept him in. Kamala, tired of that Burger King paycheck, commented, "I was the one bringing the people. He was the one taking the money." Lawler was slick too. He'd booked Kamala to look like a wild beast, but behind the scenes, he was taming him like a dog trainer with treats. Every time Kamala asked for a raise, Lawler hit him with, "You'll get exposure." Yeah, exposure to poverty. You ever work with a dude who smiles in your face, shakes your hand, then stabs your wallet? That's Jerry Lawler. Man built a whole castle out of bullshit and called it the Memphis territory. Kamala gave him sellouts, and Lawler gave him bus fare. If Memphis was wrestling's Graceland, Kamala was the housekeeper, and Jerry was still asking him to bring towels. Now Eric Bischoff, Lord have mercy. This bougie karate boy had Kamala out here looking like a cultural relic in a room full of neon-colored steroid monsters, and still couldn't find it in his heart to pay the big man right. Let me explain. Kamala came to WCW like, "I'm here to get that bread." And Eric said, "Cool, we got cornbread and exposure." See, Bischoff thought he was slick. He ran WCW like a strip club with no license. A lot of lights, a lot of music, no one going home with cash. He had Kamala, a damn legend, doing squash matches for a check so small it could hide under Hulk Hogan's hairline. Kamala said he was owed $13,000 after a WCW run. And Eric, that man went full ghost mode. Didn't call, didn't write, didn't even send a biscuit in the mail. You ever been so broke the man who owes you money has you looking at your own food stamps like, what would Kamala do? "I never got that money. They just stopped returning my calls," Kamala once said in a shoot. And keep in mind, Kamala was already used to Vince McMahon's plantation payroll. So for Bischoff to come through and make Vince look like Oprah, you know you messed up. Kamala felt like a prop. No storylines, no titles, no respect, just tribal paint, silence, and a bag of invisible money. Bischoff had all that Ted Turner cash and still paid him like he was getting reimbursed in Monopoly bills. Man promoted NWO like it was hip-hop and booked the Ugandan giant like he was a deleted scene from Roots. He didn't pull a gun on Eric, but I promise you, he probably priced one. Let's be clear, most people saw Andre the Giant and thought, wow, what a marvel of nature. Kamala saw him and thought, wow, what a 7-foot sack of French piss who thinks racism is a love language. Andre didn't like Kamala, not because of wrestling, not because of ring work. Nah, because Kamala was black, and when I say black, I mean visibly, unapologetically black. The kind of black that made racists clutch their daughters and their rosaries at the same time. He walked in the locker room like a man. Andre treated him like a mini-game in colonial conquest. He called me the N-word, not once, every night, like it was on the booking sheet. Kamala, in a shoot interview, sounding like a man who just remembered where he buried the body. Andre didn't wrestle Kamala, he assaulted him with a crowd. Stiff shots, brutal knees, boots the size of car doors. You know you're a bastard when the savage gimmick is the babyface in this feud. Andre once dropped his knee so hard on his throat that he thought Jesus was tagging in. Spoiler, he wasn't. So Kamala did what any man would do when he's had enough of being racially assaulted by a circus act with C-cup tits. He went to the back and grabbed a gun. I was going to shoot him. The only reason I didn't was because God told me not to. Kamala, aka the only man in pro wrestling with a body count vetoed by Jesus. And what did Andre do after that? Did he apologize? No. He just stopped using slurs and started shaking Kamala's hand before matches. It turns out when a black man in face paint brings a firearm to work, even French racists remember their manners. Andre was billed as the eighth wonder of the world. To Kamala, he was the first reason he ever needed a silencer. If Andre was a gentle giant, then Kamala was a restrained murderer with a great finish. If God created wrestling, Vince McMahon saw it, bought it, and underpaid everybody with melanin. The Ugandan giant didn't hate Vince because of one bad decision. He hated Vince because he existed like a corporate virus that infected every match, every gimmick, every contract, and left black wrestlers in the dust like unpaid Uber drivers. Kamala wasn't just disrespected, he was financially mugged. Vince flew him out, gave him a gimmick that was 80% racist stereotype, and then treated him like the only savage part of the character was his bank account. I wrestled Hulk Hogan, sold out houses. Vince gave me $5,000, Hogan made hundreds of thousands. Kamala, shoot interview, wearing poverty like it was ring gear. Let's put that in perspective. He main evented Madison Square Garden, helped sell millions in merch, and the only bonus he got was a ride in the back of the bus. Vince was out here making racist jungle action figures and never sent him a damn penny. The guy literally watched Kamala's likeness make money while his actual legs got amputated from diabetes. That's not mismanagement, that's cartoon villain behavior. Vince didn't just bury him, he taxed him for the shovel. Kamala once said he was making more money selling handmade wooden chairs in Mississippi than he did in WWE. That's right, Vince paid him so little, carpentry looked like an upgrade. If Kamala had sold jungle masks door to door, he'd have made more and worked less. And the final spit in the face? When Kamala was sick and broke, the WWE machine sent out a little thoughts and prayers tweet and rolled back to the gym. No reparations, no royalties, not even a sorry about those voodoo promos, my bad. Vince didn't give Kamala a legacy, he gave him an invoice for the body he left behind. If Vince McMahon's legacy is sports entertainment, then Kamala's legacy is the unpaid invoice with a bullet-pointed list of lies. The Ugandan giant ain't around to clap back, because like so many black wrestlers, he died broke, broken, and disrespected by a business he helped build. Diabetes took his legs, the business took his dignity, and the only thing he left behind was the sound of receipts slapping like steel chairs in an empty locker room. He didn't get a Hall of Fame, he didn't get his royalties, but what he did get was a legacy of truth, of pain, and of hating the right people until the day he died. If you felt that roast in your soul like a forearm from 85, click like, hit subscribe, and stay with us. We're telling real stories, real beef, and giving these legends the send-offs they damn well earned. No kayfabe, no mercy. Just jokes and justice, just the way he would have liked it. He finally got his Hall of Fame in 2025, 5 years too late. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned for Truth and Fire. Thanks for watching. Owen Hart hated working with a handful of wrestlers, but luckily for the rest of us, it wasn't the whole roster. Because if Owen had beef with everyone, wrestling would have looked like a vegan barbecue. Awkward, tense, and nobody having a good time. Owen was one of the few guys in the biz who could make you laugh and fear a steel chair in the same breath. But like every rose has its thorn, Owen had his personal list of locker room nightmares. Today, we're diving deep into the real backstage beef Owen couldn't swallow. No kayfabe, no scripted drama, just cold, hard, shoot-level heat. From botched pile drivers to family betrayals, these are the 5, well, actually 3, more on that later, wrestlers Owen Hart genuinely hated working with. Strap in, this isn't your grandma's wrestling gossip. Steve Austin hated Owen Hart like a Texas rattlesnake hates a cold spotlight. And that spotlight came crashing down at SummerSlam '97 when Owen hit a sit-out tombstone pile driver that nearly paralyzed Austin for life. No kayfabe here. This wasn't, he hurt me, brother. This was, I couldn't feel my limbs for a few seconds and thought my career was over. Now, normally, when a wrestler screws up that bad, they follow it up with a hospital visit, an apology, maybe even a fruit basket if they're Canadian. Owen Hart said nothing. Not backstage, not publicly, not even a casual, "shit happens, my bad," on the way to catering. He felt bad, according to Bret, but he never said it. That silence, that's what burned Austin more than the broken neck. Austin's said it for decades. The lack of an apology made it personal. He never called to say, "Hey, are you okay?" That quote stayed with Austin longer than the pain did. In interviews and books, on his podcast, it comes up like a scar that won't fade. Stone Cold built an empire of toughness, but Owen left a crack in the foundation. And Owen, he hated that. Not Austin, the man. But the fact that one freak accident defined how fans remembered him when his whole damn career had been about being clean, technical, and safe. Owen was known for ribbing guys, but with Austin, there were no jokes, no ribs, just a stiff, mutual silence. Backstage, you could feel the tension like static cling on a leather jacket. They avoided each other like Vince avoids taking blame. Was it personal beef? Kind of. Owen didn't throw hands or run his mouth, but he resented how the incident handcuffed his reputation and how Austin kept burying him without closure. It wasn't full-on hatred, but it was professional regret soaked in cold bitterness. He hated the situation, he hated the weight of it, and he probably hated himself a little for not squashing it while he had the chance. Bottom line, Owen Hart didn't hate Steve Austin the way Austin hated Owen, but he hated being turned into a villain in someone else's comeback story, and he carried that quiet anger to the grave. If you ever wanted to see a man try to wrestle a fog machine, look no further than Owen Hart vs. Conan. On paper, it should have worked. Owen's clinical precision versus Conan's lucha-flavored showmanship. But to Owen, Conan was a no-sell circus act in parachute pants, and he made it no secret backstage. They tangled in Stampede Wrestling in the late 80s and early 90s, and Owen saw it plain as day. Conan didn't belong in his ring. Owen Hart thought Conan was sloppy, untrained, and completely unfit to share a ring with a Hart family member. That's not speculation. That's from multiple Stampede veterans who remembered Owen lobbying to get out of working with the guy. Bret Hart even alluded to it in Wrestling with Shadows, calling Conan a personality, not a wrestler. To Owen, wrestling was a craft. Conan was treating it like a nightclub audition. The dude came out in shades, threw gang signs, and wrestled like the bell was interrupting his mixtape. Owen, raised in the Hart dungeon, where a headlock came with a free near-death experience, had zero patience for Conan's flippy, unstructured style. He wasn't lucha, he was lucha adjacent. And Owen hated that half-stepping more than Shawn Michaels hated drug tests. Even worse, Conan didn't think much of Owen either. In early interviews, he said Owen was stiff and condescending, and once refused to call a match mid-ring just to prove a point. That kind of pettiness? That's dungeon-level spite, baby. Owen believed wrestling had rules, and Conan was out here wrestling like someone dared him to do a moonsault off the ring steps blindfolded. Bottom line, Owen Hart hated working with Conan the way a surgeon hates WebMD, loud, clueless, and way too confident for someone who doesn't know what the hell they're doing. Owen Hart didn't just hate working with Vince McMahon, he hated being stuck working for Vince McMahon. And after Survivor Series 97, he wasn't just another disgruntled employee, he was a hostage with ring gear. Let's set the table. Bret gets publicly screwed in Montreal. Vince gets punched into another zip code. And Owen? Owen gets tossed into a storyline with Deborah McMichael and Jeff Jarrett like nothing happened. The man just watched his real-life brother get jobbed out in front of a nation, and Vince's response was basically, "Hey pal, let's give you some new theme music." Owen didn't need to punch Vince to make his feelings known. His silence was so deafening you could hear it in Connecticut. According to Jim Ross, Owen refused to speak to Vince for weeks. Bruce Pritchard said he was ice cold toward the office. And Bret straight up said Owen only stayed because he needed the money and had a family to feed. That's not employment, that's wrestling indentured servitude. Owen despised being the last Hart left in WWF. Vince even tried to butter him up with a mid-card push, the Blue Blazer reboot, a few title matches. But Owen saw through it like it was Stephanie McMahon's acting. Every time Vince tried to talk to him, Owen gave him the same look you give someone who rear-ended your car and asked if you had insurance. The final insult? Vince booked Owen's tragic death like it was just another Monday. While Owen's body was still warm, Vince was already rolling out the show must go on speech like he was auditioning for a Bond villain. Owen hated Vince's manipulative corporate lingo bullshit while he was alive. And if ghosts exist, he probably haunted Titan Tower just to unplug the coffee machines. And here's the kicker. Even after Owen died, Vince tried to spin the tragedy into a PR save. Martha Hart later said Vince tried to get her to work something out quietly. Quietly? That's like murdering a guy and asking his widow if she'll keep it off social media. Bottom line, Owen Hart hated working with Vince McMahon the way a lion hates working at a zoo. Sure, you get fed, but the cage never opens and your dignity gets sold at the gift shop. Owen Hart didn't walk around with a chip on his shoulder. He carried integrity on it. The man wasn't out to start fights. He was out to wrestle, rib, and make it home to his family in one piece. His enemy list was short because most people respected the hell out of him. But if you were lazy, unsafe, fake, or your name rhymed with Jinx Rickman, then yeah, he'd lace up the quiet hate and let his work speak for itself. And in this business, silence hits harder than a chair shot. And if this roast hit harder than a stiff clothesline, smash that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe for more no kayfabe all shoot wrestling heat. No myths, just receipts. Stephanie McMahon, part boss, part bulldozer and heels. She didn't just inherit Vince's jawline, she inherited his ability to ruin a career like it owed her child support. This isn't about storyline slaps or backstage catfights choreographed by Kevin Dunn. Nope. This is legit shoot heat, the kind that gets your push buried faster than a tag team division after WrestleMania. These are the 5 poor bastards who found themselves in Stephanie's crosshairs, some for opening their mouths, others for daring to exist without her approval. When Steph hates you, you don't just lose screen time, you vanish like Shane during tax season. No myths, no kayfabe, just real-life nuclear beef, petty power moves, and a few career-ending death stares from Titan Tower's Iron Lady. Rob Van Dam was the whole damn show, until Stephanie McMahon watched and said, "That's enough of that." RVD might have had the smoothest moves this side of Jeff Hardy's arrest record, but backstage, he was about as excited to work with Stephanie as he was to pass a wellness test. According to RVD himself, Stephanie once pitched him a creative idea involving her. He heard it, blinked twice, and politely declined. It's like turning down a job at Amazon in front of Jeff Bezos during a layoff. You don't say no to Steph unless you're high or suicidal. Rob, being both on any given weekday, said no. Steph allegedly hated his attitude, calling him hard to work with, which is rich coming from someone whose idea of collaboration is yelling until you agree. After that, RVD wasn't buried, he was slow roasted. He still showed up on TV, but only so his contract could expire with a whimper. He went from Mr. Monday Night to Mr. Wait, is this a rerun? He returned in 2013 and got about as much momentum as a fart in a hurricane. Stephanie didn't punish him with a storyline, she punished him with silence. The man was more underutilized than a wellness policy in the 80s. It was like watching a Ferrari stuck in neutral because the boss didn't like the color. In the end, Rob Van Dam proved you can be a fan favorite, a top merch seller, and a generational talent, and still get Stephanied. That's when your career doesn't get cut, it gets politely declined back. Or AJ Lee had the guts of a pipe bomb and the mic skills of someone who actually read books. In a company full of yes men and don't rock the boat Barbie dolls, AJ rolled up in Chuck Taylors and verbally suplexed the boss's daughter. In 2015, Stephanie McMahon jumped on Twitter to brag about the WWE's support for women's rights. AJ responded with a tweet so cold, it gave Twitter frostbite. It read, "Your female wrestlers have record-selling merchandise and have starred in the highest-rated segments of the show, and yet they receive a fraction of the wages and screen time." That tweet landed like a missile. And inside Titan Towers, Steph was reportedly furious. You don't call out the queen bee and expect flowers. You get stung, suplexed, and sent home. Soon after that tweet, AJ vanished from TV faster than logic from a Vince Russo script. WWE said she retired. Right, and I'm a cruiserweight. What actually happened? Backstage heat so hot it made Hell in a Cell feel like brunch in the Hamptons. This wasn't just wrestling drama, it was a civil war in yoga pants. On one side, AJ Lee married to CM Punk, already blacklisted by association. On the other, Stephanie, the woman whose elevator only goes to the top floor, because she's already cut the cables to everyone else's. AJ was never mentioned again. No Hall of Fame whispers, no legacy tributes, no thank you AJ chants promoted by WWE. Steph didn't just erase her, She Men in Black memory wiped her entire run. Moral of the story? never quote wage stats to a billionaire's daughter. She doesn't see numbers, just threats. And AJ Lee, she may have been small, but that clapback was WrestleMania main event worthy. CM Punk was the voice of the voiceless. And by voiceless, I mean anyone who ever wanted to call Stephanie McMahon a power-tripping legacy brat, but still wanted a paycheck. Let's just say Steph and Punk never sent each other Christmas cards. Punk once said, "Stephanie McMahon is idiotic," on a live mic in front of millions. And in WWE, that's not a promo, that's a suicide note. Behind the scenes, it got colder than Vince's voicemail after WrestleMania. Steph reportedly pushed to limit Punk's creative freedom. Punk pushed back, verbally, constantly, and often with the word stupid involved. Sources say she hated his attitude, his noncompliance, and the fact that he had more fans in a weekend than she had in 2 decades of scripted dominance. And let's not forget his wife was AJ Lee. See the previous roast. If Steph hated AJ for airing dirty laundry on Twitter, then she loathed Punk for torching the entire laundromat. When Punk walked out in 2014, he didn't just ghost the company, he left a Scorched Earth podcast with Colt Cabana where he name-dropped the McMahons like it was a hit list. He called Triple H a doofus, said Steph made things worse backstage, and exposed how petty their empire really was. In WWE, you can piss off the boss, maybe even the boss's dad, but piss off the boss's daughter who married the other boss, and your merch gets pulled faster than a failed drug test in 2007. Steph didn't just want Punk gone, she wanted him erased like he owed her money. Paul Heyman was everything Stephanie McMahon hated in a man. Smart, loud, Jewish, and right. This wasn't just backstage beef, this was foie gras grade, Manhattan Deli level premium hate. Back in the early 2000s, Paul Heyman walked into WWE after ECW collapsed like a Jenga tower on bath salts. Vince hired him as a creative genius. Stephanie hired him as a human ulcer. The two were oil and water, if oil screamed extreme, and water wore power suits and passive-aggressively buried people on TV. They butted heads constantly in creative meetings. Paul wanted blood, violence, and storytelling. Stephanie wanted safe, corporate-friendly filler with cleavage and pyro. Heyman once told friends that working with her was like debating with a PR robot who thought she invented wrestling because she sat on Vince's lap during WrestleMania 1. In 2003, Paul Heyman got so over as a writer and performer on SmackDown that Stephanie, then head of creative, allegedly engineered his removal. Translation, he got more credit than she liked, and that made her itch like a Divas belt covered in glitter and resentment. According to Bruce Pritchard, Steph thought Heyman was a pathological liar. Heyman thought she was a nepotism princess with a boardroom fetish. Heyman got fired, rehired, demoted, blamed, and ultimately banished from creative meetings like a warlock who conjured too many good ideas. Stephanie didn't just clash with Paul, she tried to surgically remove his influence from the product, the way a surgeon removes a tumor they're jealous of. But here's the twist. Heyman always came back. You can't kill a cockroach with charisma. He returned in 2012, strapped Brock Lesnar to his chest like a smart bomb, and Stephanie had to eat it. Again. Paul Heyman's success is Steph's worst nightmare. It proved that someone outside her DNA pool could do it better. Chyna wasn't just the 9th wonder of the world. She was the walking reminder that Triple H once had taste, and for Stephanie McMahon, that was an unforgivable sin. This wasn't beef. This was biblical betrayal marinated in steroids, porn, and public humiliation. Let's run the timeline. Chyna was dating Triple H. Then Steph got him. Then Chyna got FedExed out of the company like an Amazon return with visible trauma. And you think Steph let it go? Bruh, she ghosted Chyna harder than Vince ghosted the XFL. According to Chyna herself, she confronted Steph about the affair and was never spoken to again. That's not a grudge. That's a Cold War with implants. And when Chyna left WWE, they didn't just erase her, they Thanos snapped her. No merch, no mentions, no Hall of Fame. Hell, the Divas title got more legacy treatment, and that belt looked like a Claire's clearance bin. Triple H tried to defend the blackout by saying, kids might Google her porn. Really, Hunter? That's your excuse? You married Stephanie McMahon and you're worried about someone else's internet history? And when she finally did get into the Hall of Fame, they threw her in as part of DX, the equivalent of inducting Tina Turner by listing her as Ike Turner's percussionist. Stephanie hated Chyna so much, she treated her WWE legacy like it owed her alimony. If Chyna had died in kayfabe, Steph wouldn't have kicked dirt on her grave. She'd have sold the headstone on Shop Zone for $49.99 plus shipping. No lie, this was the pettiest, coldest, realest hate in WWE history. Chyna dated the wrong man, and Steph made damn sure history forgot her, until death made her posthumously profitable. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what happens when the ex-girlfriend was more over than the wife. She didn't just inherit a billion-dollar empire, she weaponized it like a backstage nuke. If you crossed her, kissed the wrong person, lit up backstage, or popped off on a podcast, she didn't argue. She deleted you, erased from history, ignored in interviews, airbrushed out of photo ops like a communist ex. These weren't grudges, these were personal kill shots wrapped in HR memos, and she made them look like company policy. You could headline pay-per-views, sell out stadiums, make history. Didn't matter. If you made the wrong face in Gorilla or tweeted with attitude, you were out faster than a budget cut in April. She ran the company like a mafia queen in Louboutins. And if you weren't family, you were just competition in a cage with no booking power. If you like your wrestling real and your roasts ruthless, hit that like, slap that subscribe, and come back for more. This ain't kayfabe, it's shoot season. Thanks for watching. Stan Hansen wasn't out here playing wrestler. The guy was a human cattle prod with a beer gut and a bull rope, and he hated two things: phony politicking and getting told what to do. So if someone pissed him off backstage, they didn't just get a receipt. They got a stiff-ass boot in the face and their name scratched off his calendar like a credit default. This ain't some fluff piece about, oh, we had creative differences. Nah, these two clowns made Hansen legitimately want to beat ass in catering. The first, a promo-cutting disco ball with a fake tan and a mirror bigger than his moveset. The second, a crooked promoter who couldn't book a match if Dusty Rhodes ghost wrote it for him in crayons. So let's get right into it. If you asked Stan Hansen to describe Austin Idol in one word, it'd probably be bullshit. And if you gave him two, backstage bullshit. Idol strutted around locker rooms like Ric Flair without the talent or the respect. He called himself the universal heartthrob, but to Hansen, he was the universal headache, a walking ego trip in glitter tights. Hansen came from the school of shut up and hit hard. Idol came from the school of kiss ass and cut promos. The tension exploded in Memphis in the early 80s. Hansen was booked to team with Idol, but the vibe was off from day one. Idol politicked behind the scenes, lobbied Jerry Jarrett like a used car salesman, and allegedly had a hand in Hansen getting cut from the territory altogether. Hansen didn't just walk out, he stormed out of Memphis, and he never forgot who pushed him out the door. In shoot interviews, Hansen doesn't mince words. He was all about himself. Couldn't trust him as far as I could throw him. Coming from a guy who once tossed Vader's eye halfway across Tokyo Dome, that's saying something. Idol, meanwhile, always played coy. All charisma and white teeth like a QVC host in a headlock. But behind that charm was a manipulator who worked the booking sheets harder than the wrist locks. Hansen was allergic to that kind of garbage. He didn't hate showmen, he hated snakes. Let's be real. Austin Idol didn't want to wrestle with Stan Hansen. He wanted to wrestle around him, like a guy dodging a bar fight he started. Hansen didn't just dislike Idol, he despised him. He saw him as everything wrong with the business. A spotlight-chasing, mirror-loving, overhyped promo machine who wouldn't know a stiff shot from a Slim Jim ad. If Austin Idol was the universal heartthrob, Stan Hansen was the cosmic ass-kicker. And brother, that lariat wasn't missing. Idol's real heat wasn't just with Hansen. It was with the entire generation of no BS brawlers who saw through his gimmick and wanted to send him back to whatever tanning bed he crawled out of. There were guys Hansen fought. There were guys he respected. Then there was Austin Idol, the guy he hoped never walked through the locker room door again. If Austin Idol gave Stan Hansen heartburn, Jim Crockett Jr. gave him a full-on aneurysm. Let's start with this. Hansen didn't just hate Crockett. He hated what Crockett represented: soft-ass booking, flaky promises, and a good old boy system, where the handshake meant about as much as a handshake from a guy with Vaseline on his palm. Crockett promised Hansen a Japan-friendly NWA title run in 1985. Hansen wanted to defend the belt in Tokyo. Crockett said, sure. But when push came to lariat, Jim backpedaled faster than Idol in a bar fight. Hansen's response? He didn't call, he didn't email. He dropped the belt off like a pissed-off FedEx driver and skipped town. Hansen didn't care about TV ratings or booking committees. He cared about two things: money and respect. Crockett couldn't manage either. His idea of diplomacy was, let's book Flair to Blade on TBS again and hope Japan doesn't notice. Hansen thought Crockett's office was run like a family reunion with CTE. Too many chiefs, no goddamn cattle. he told Japanese media in '86. That's about as polite as Hansen ever got. Jim Crockett Jr. was the king of broken promises. He told Hansen he'd be NWA champ, respected worldwide. Instead, Hansen ended up in a contract tug-of-war between Carolina cronies and Tokyo suits. You don't mess with a man who throws chairs at fans for fun. Hansen was a one-man riot squad in boots, and Crockett tried to treat him like another Southern Territory stooge. Let's be real. Stan Hansen didn't walk out on Crockett. He fucking ran. The NWA belt was sacred, but Hansen left it in an office like it was a pair of rental skates. Imagine a cowboy so mad he abandons the title his heroes once held. That's how deep the shoot ran. And Crockett? He sent Flair to pick up the pieces like a janitor at a bar fight. Flair was already bleeding from the forehead when he got there, from emotional damage. Crockett told Hansen he was going to make him a star. Hansen told Crockett to go book himself. Jim Crockett Jr. ran a wrestling empire like a kid who inherited a zoo and fed the lions NyQuil. The guy booked good cards, sure, but he made promises like a mattress salesman. Stan Hansen wasn't about that fluff. You either shoot straight or you get a lariat that will knock you right into 1987. Crockett got a lariat in the wallet. Let's not forget, Crockett's entire business imploded within 3 years of screwing Hansen. Coincidence? Maybe. But Hansen fans call that divine justice and a Stetson hat. The NWA got sold to Turner, Flair was overexposed, and Crockett ended up flipping real estate in Texas like a guy who once pissed off the wrong Gaijin cowboy. Stan Hansen came from the school of hard way. Crockett came from the school of, let's hope nobody notices we're broke. You don't disrespect a Texas bull like Hansen. He ain't Ric Flair. He ain't Dusty Rhodes. You can't out-talk him, outspin him, or outwork him. You can only hope he doesn't snap your neck with a shoot elbow at a Denny's. And, yeah, even years later, Stan Hansen still wouldn't take Crockett's calls. Crockett could have offered him a steak dinner and a blank check, and Hansen would have used the napkin to spit on his booking sheet. Hansen hated Crockett not because he was evil, but because he was weak, and weak men in suits never last long in cowboy country. Stan Hansen wasn't your average locker room snake ready to bite anyone at a moment's notice. No, the man was more like a grizzly bear. You didn't want to get on his bad side, but if you earned his respect, you could roam in peace. He saw a lot of wrestlers sideways, and sure, some he downright disliked, but genuine, full-on shoot hatred? That was rare. Hansen's hate was surgical, selective, and only dropped like a sledgehammer when respect was trampled. Take Vader, for example. These two shared a brutal relationship in the ring. Hansen famously told Japanese reporters that Vader worked too stiff and had no finesse. But did he hate him? No way. Hansen saw Vader as a tough-as-nails competitor with the heart of a bruiser, even if he didn't always appreciate his style or work habits. They clashed, sure, but there was professional respect underneath the gruff exterior. Hansen's beefs were usually with people who lied to him, disrespected the craft, or got involved in politics. He hated phonies and liars, not wrestlers who simply wrestled differently. If you came to work, took your bumps, and respected the code, Hansen treated you like family, even if you weren't his favorite drinking buddy. He often didn't get along with the showmen, the Austin Idols, the politics-heavy Jim Crockett Jr.'s, because they represented everything he despised. Fluff over fight, talking over doing. But he never wasted his energy on guys who just wrestled. He saw some wrestlers as soft, others as too slick, but flat-out hate. That was saved for a select few who crossed real lines. Even the legendary Terry Funk, known for his own hardcore style and volatile personality, was a friend and sometimes sparring partner in both fists and words. They might have tossed shade, but never venom. That's because Hansen's hate was less personal and more about principles. If you broke the unwritten rules of respect in wrestling, like political backstabbing or screwing over a partner, you'd find yourself on the wrong end of his wrath. And yeah, there were times Hansen's cold stare could chill a man's soul, but he was never one to keep grudges for petty crap. His reputation wasn't built on drama or locker room gossip. It was built on crushing lariats, brutal honesty, and a relentless pursuit of respect. In short, Stan Hansen's hate was reserved for those who betrayed the fight. For the wrestlers who simply wrestled, he might have sighed or rolled his eyes, but he'd never waste the energy to truly hate them. That's a cowboy code you don't see often anymore. Thanks for watching. Before we begin, please remember that this is a roast, not a personal attack. Just jokes for entertainment, not my actual opinions. It's all written in the spirit of comedy and satire with no real hate behind it. Leon White, aka Big Van Vader, wasn't just a wrestler. He was a refrigerator with arms, a dump truck with feelings, a kaiju with a 401k. At nearly 400 pounds, the man could do moonsaults like gravity owed him money. His mask looked like a BDSM vacuum cleaner. He wheezed like a possessed radiator, and he still beat the brakes off anybody who got cute. Vader was built like every food court security guard's worst nightmare, and he moved like a ballerina possessed by Satan. You've seen big men fly, sure. But have you ever seen a flying refrigerator? That's Vader. He came off the top rope like it owed him child support. But Vader wasn't all roid rage and shoulder pads. He had feelings, mostly anger, but feelings nonetheless. And those feelings, he carried them like receipts at a tax audit. If you stiffed him, lied to him, worked sloppy, or just looked like you might have stolen his catering chicken, you were dead to him. He didn't do fake heat. Vader's hate came straight from the ribcage, marinated in resentment and slow-roasted in bile. So when he really hated you, that meant he'd either shoot on you in the ring, roast you for decades after retirement, or dream about throwing you into traffic while wearing his sleep apnea mask and a grimace. We're talking real hate, the kind of hate you don't just tweet about, the kind of hate that bubbles up when your opponent hits you with a potato and then giggles. Vader would bottle that hate, shake it up, and unleash it mid-match with the subtlety of a rhinoceros having a seizure on a trampoline. Today, we're counting down the 5 real-life wrestlers Vader hated like his tights hated his thighs. These weren't storyline feuds. This was pure, unfiltered, locker room loathing. This was Vader giving interviews 20 years later like he was reading from his personal burn book. These men didn't just cross him, they made him want to relocate their spines to the 3rd row. Bam Bam Bigelow looked like if a Hot Wheels car did meth and joined a biker gang, covered in flames, tattooed scalp, built like a busted propane tank, and somehow he moved like gravity had a grudge against him, which would have been fine if he wasn't in the ring with a man who wrestled like he was legally trying to kill you. See, Vader didn't wrestle, Vader hunted. He went out there to tenderize your bones like he was prepping you for a Viking funeral. But then here comes Bam Bam, bouncing around like someone drop-kicked a yoga ball. The man sold a clothesline like he'd just been shot through time. Every time Vader hit him, Bam Bam would flail like a dolphin trying to escape SeaWorld. It was like watching a heavyweight fight where one guy thinks it's UFC and the other thinks it's the Moulin Rouge. Vader hated him, hated the way Bam Bam turned their matches into slapstick sketches. You could almost hear Benny Hill music playing when Bigelow took a bump. Oh no, I've been hit with a forearm. Time to cartwheel into the 3rd row, do a flip, crash through a nacho stand, and then dramatically die like I'm in Les Miserables. Vader's watching this go down like, is this man bleeding internally or auditioning for Cirque du fucking Soleil? Backstage, tension so thick you could grill steak on it. Vader's pacing like a zoo animal while Bam Bam's sitting there happy as a pig in heat, probably talking about how fun that match was. Fun? Vader just lost 5 years off his life trying to convince the audience he wasn't teaming with a damn trampoline. And Bam Bam? He's none the wiser. He's the kind of guy who'd crash your car into a ditch and say, hey, at least we got a story out of it. The worst part? Bam Bam was good. Vader knew it, couldn't stand it. Bigelow could actually work, which made his buffoonery even worse, like watching a brain surgeon use a chainsaw because he thinks it's more exciting. It's not exciting, it's a war crime with music. Vader wanted his opponents to look like they just survived a hostage situation. Bam Bam made it look like an off-Broadway production of The Hunger Games, and for that, he earned Vader's hatred. Every flippy-dippy, oversold circus act second of it. Bam Bam Bigelow, the first man in wrestling history to take a body slam like he was re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. Vader never forgave him, not because he was bad, but because he was too good to be this annoying. Paul Orndorff was the kind of man who looked like he shaved his chest with a cheese grater and used the blood to oil his mustache. He was built like a G.I. Joe action figure that's been microwaved just long enough to give it opinions. Mr. Wonderful? More like Mr. Unbearable if you ever spoke to him for more than 45 seconds. Vader hated him, not in the I'll kill you in the parking lot way, more like the I'll put you through a wall and then explain why it was your fault kind of hate. And he wasn't wrong. Orndorff had what we in the UK call resting backstabbing face. The kind of man who'd shake your hand, nod politely, and then sell your kidneys on eBay before you made it back from Gorilla. He once sucker-punched Vader in flip-flops. Flip-flops. You have to really hate a man to try and throw hands dressed like you're returning a margarita at a sandals resort. That's not a fight. That's a passive-aggressive spa day turned felony. But let's be honest, punching Vader while wearing beach shoes is about as smart as headbutting a vending machine because it ate your crisps. It's bold, it's brave, and it's profoundly fucking stupid. See, Orndorff was one of those old-school respect-the-business types, which is hilarious because he spent half his career acting like a petty ex-girlfriend with delts. He talked like a veteran, but moved like a guy who'd just heard the words hip replacement and whispered, "Yes, please." He thought Vader was lazy. Vader thought Orndorff was jealous, and the only thing stiffer than their matches was Orndorff's spine, probably from carrying that ego around like a sack of wet cement. There's a famous locker room story where Orndorff blasts Vader. Vader no-sells it like a hurricane hitting a lighthouse, and the whole roster just stands there watching like, yep, this is how we lose catering today. Vader was later asked if he wanted to make peace. He said, and this is almost a direct quote, "I'd rather hug a cactus than shake that man's hand." Paul Orndorff, the kind of guy who'd stab you in the back, then complain the knife was too dull. Stan Hansen didn't just knock Vader's eye out of its socket. He punched it so hard, Vader probably started seeing the future and realized it was going to be full of bad decisions. Hansen was like a drunk rhinoceros on steroids with a vendetta against eyeballs, and Vader was just unlucky enough to be standing in front of his fist. Imagine getting hit so hard you spend the next few months looking like you're auditioning for Pirates of the Caribbean 10, The Masked Wrestler. Stan wasn't just a wrestler, he was a biological weapon, the kind of guy who made security guards nervous just by blinking. When Hansen threw a punch, it wasn't a punch. It was a demolition derby with your face as the crash test dummy. Vader hated Hansen, not just because he was a legit bruiser, but because Stan made him feel vulnerable. Like suddenly the big guy had a glaring design flaw. The man who could moonwalk from the top rope suddenly had to squint like he was trying to read fine print on a contract he was about to burn. And let's be honest, getting your eye knocked out by Stan Hansen, that's less badge of honor and more, why did I trust a cowboy who looks like he fights bears for breakfast? Vader's hate wasn't just physical pain, it was existential dread wrapped in a cowboy hat. Vader hated Vince McMahon like a vegan hates a barbecue joint, with pure, unfiltered contempt that could curdle milk and kill houseplants. Why? Because Vince saw Vader not as a powerhouse, but as a paycheck with legs, a walking paycheck with a mask and a bad attitude. To Vince, Vader was the guy they booked to get crushed for star-making babyfaces, which is corporate speak for, you're a giant hired punching bag. Imagine being the human equivalent of a wrestling piñata, only instead of candy, you got body shots and contract cuts. Between 1996 and 1999, Vince pulled the kind of crap that made Vader look like he was working for a used car salesman with a fetish for discount masks. He had Vader on a contract but barely knew the man, which is like signing a top-tier draft pick and then benching him to watch soap operas. Worse, Vince booked Vader to job out to lighter, faster guys who probably couldn't carry a fridge, let alone get slammed by one. Vader wasn't just mad, he was insulted. It's like hiring Mike Tyson to babysit and then giving him a juice box. Backstage, Vader reportedly seethed at Vince's micromanagement. Imagine being a beast in the ring, only to have the boss man with the personality of a tax audit tell you how to do your job. Vader hated that Vince saw him as just another cog in the machine, a cash cow to milk until he broke down. If Vader had his way, Vince's next creative meeting would be in a locked room with a very angry masked man and no exit signs. Because when you treat a monster like a muppet, you get snarls, and Vader wasn't the kind of guy you wanted snarling at you. Vader hated Shawn Michaels like a butcher hates tofu. This guy strutted around like he was auditioning for Dancing with the Stars instead of trying not to get crushed by a 400-pound monster. Shawn's moves looked less like wrestling and more like a midlife crisis at a hip-hop convention. All glitter, no grit. Vader probably thought Shawn was the love child of a boy band and a drag queen, who somehow convinced everyone his stiff kicks were art. Backstage, Vader saw Shawn as the kind of guy who'd cry if someone spilled his protein shake but wouldn't hesitate to throw you under the bus faster than he could moonwalk. The dude's ego was so big, it needed its own zip code. And let's be honest, the guy couldn't take a real hit if his life depended on it. Every stiff punch from Vader was met with a performance so dramatic, it could have won an Oscar for Best Fake Injury. So, here's the classic moment. Vader botches a spot, and Shawn Michaels, Mr. Perfect, decides the best way to teach him a lesson is to stomp on his head like he's trying to crush a bug. Except the bug's a 400-pound flying refrigerator. That stomp wasn't a gentle reminder, it was a message in boot-shaped Morse code. You messed up, and now you're gonna feel it, big guy. Imagine that for a second. You're Vader, built like a brick wall with a black hole in your chest, trying to execute a move that feels like defusing a bomb with oven mitts, and Shawn turns into Godzilla and squashes your head like it owes him money. That stomp wasn't just a correction, it was a power play. Shawn's way of saying, don't fuck up my choreography or I'll turn you into a pretzel. And that stomp, it wasn't forgotten. Vader never forgot. Because in wrestling, when you get stomped by the showstopper, it's less about the pain and more about the insult. You don't just get your leg crushed, you get your pride stomped into the mat with it. So that's the roster of Rage, a lineup so toxic it makes radioactive waste look like bubblegum. We're talking about the walking disasters, the puppet masters, the floppers, the pretty boys who sting like a slap, and the cowboys who will rearrange your face like a Picasso painting gone wrong. Vader wasn't just a bruiser. He was a man who kept grudges tighter than spandex on a humid day. These guys weren't just disliked, they were hated, roasted, and tossed aside like last year's protein shake. If Vader's hate was a wrestling move, it'd be a powerbomb through your ego and self-respect. So hit subscribe, smash that like button, and whatever you do, don't get on that list. Because if you do, history might just deliver a stiff punch from a man who made the ring his personal vendetta playground. Thanks for watching. Blackjack Mulligan Sr., born Robert DeRoy Wyndham, was a towering figure in professional wrestling, both in stature and demeanor. Standing at 6'9" and weighing over 300 pounds, Mulligan was known for his imposing presence and no-nonsense attitude. Beyond the scripted rivalries of the ring, Mulligan's real-life confrontations were the stuff of legend, earning him a reputation as someone who didn't shy away from settling disputes with his fists. In an industry where behind-the-scenes tensions often simmered beneath the surface, Mulligan's confrontations were overt and unapologetic. Whether it was a disagreement over in-ring conduct or personal grievances, Mulligan addressed issues head-on, often leaving a trail of bruised egos and black eyes. This video delves into 5 notable instances where Mulligan's backstage animosities spilled over, highlighting his clashes with fellow wrestlers. Each account is rooted in factual events, shedding light on the volatile dynamics that characterized Mulligan's interactions with his peers. Ole Anderson and Blackjack Mulligan didn't just hate each other, they despised each other like two cacti competing for the same patch of desert. Ole was the original locker room malcontent, the kind of guy who could sour milk just by walking in. He had the charisma of a soggy sock and a personality that screamed, "Don't bother trying to like me." Mulligan? Well, he was a giant who didn't have time for Ole's venomous mouth and petty power plays. Backstage, Ole loved stirring the pot more than a witch in a cauldron. But when he set his sights on Mulligan, talking smack about his place in the company or questioning his toughness, Blackjack had a simple policy: punch first, ask questions later. According to multiple eyewitnesses, including Ric Flair's accounts, Mulligan didn't just slap Ole around. He once knocked him out cold with a single punch during a heated argument. Imagine a 6'9", 300-pound cowboy deciding that your face looked like a good punching bag. That's the kind of respect Ole got. Ole had a knack for biting off more than he could chew, and Mulligan was happy to remind him why you don't poke the bear, especially one who could bench press a Buick. Their animosity was so intense that even years later, old-timers joked Mulligan probably kept a black eye to remember Ole by. In an industry full of fake fights and scripted drama, this beef was the real deal. No scripts, no cameras, just pure, unfiltered hatred. And if that doesn't make you appreciate Blackjack Mulligan's wild, take-no-prisoner style, nothing will. Kevin Von Erich was the barefoot boy wonder of Texas wrestling, light on his feet, high-flying, and with a smile that said, "I just stepped on a Lego." To Blackjack Mulligan, Kevin was a walking hazard. Mulligan was a hard-nosed, old-school brawler, and Kevin's reckless style was an accident waiting to happen. The two had serious backstage tension during their world-class championship wrestling days. Mulligan, nursing real injuries from Kevin's stiff moves, eventually refused to work with him. Rumor has it, they nearly came to blows backstage after Kevin caught Mulligan with a move that looked like it was choreographed by a demolition crew. Mulligan's patience snapped, and he started treating Kevin like a human punching bag. Probably the only time in wrestling history a barefoot guy got called clumsy by a guy who looked like he could bench press a small sedan. Sources say Kevin's style was more wild stallion than well-trained thoroughbred, and Mulligan didn't have the patience to ride that bronco. The feud was so tense, it made the Von Erich family's own tragic history look tame by comparison. It was the kind of backstage grudge that wasn't just about wrestling, it was personal. Big John Studd was a walking telephone pole, except this one had the personality of a busted fax machine. Noisy, outdated, and somehow still managing to annoy everyone. At 6'10", and built like a small apartment block, Studd was Mulligan's natural rival both in size and in the desperate need to be the biggest ego in any room they walked into. These two didn't just dislike each other, they hated each other like a vegan hates a barbecue festival. Their beef was the kind that didn't need a script, it wrote itself in bruises and slammed lockers. One source recalls Studd once sneered at Mulligan, "You're just a washed-up cowboy with a fake name," to which Mulligan reportedly fired back, "At least I'm not a walking lamppost with bad breath." Ouch, that's less insult, more verbal curb stomp. Their backstage fights were less friendly wrestling scrums and more two bulls fighting over the last Twinkie in a nuclear fallout shelter. Studd was all tower and swagger, but Mulligan's prison-hardened fists and cowboy grit meant he wasn't the type to back down. These weren't polite disagreements. They were full-on brawls with overturned chairs, broken lockers, and probably a few shattered dreams. If you think locker room politics is drama, try being caught between these two lumbering beasts when they were mad. It was less dance and more barroom brawl with wrestling moves. Mulligan and Studd weren't just rivals, they were walking warnings to anyone who thought wrestling backstage was all smiles and fake promos. Harley Race wasn't just tough, he looked like he'd been carved out of sandpaper and barbed wire, then smoked a cigar about it. He had the face of a man who'd been in 100 bar fights, and won 99 of them. The one loss? That might have been Blackjack Mulligan. See, Mulligan didn't take orders from anybody, especially not from another alpha male who strutted around the locker room like he owned it. Harley and Mulligan were like two pit bulls forced to share a kennel, snorting, pacing, and ready to bite. Both were old school, no nonsense, and allergic to BS, which meant their interactions were about as friendly as a slap from a cactus. Their beef wasn't tabloid fodder. It was whispered about in wrestling halls by veterans who still flinch when they hear the name Harley. One backstage argument allegedly ended with Mulligan squaring up to Race like they were in a western. Harley didn't back down, but he didn't swing either, probably because even Harley knew, when a 6'9" ex-con cowboy gets mad enough to take off his boots, you let him. They didn't need to throw hands often. The tension alone could sterilize a room. They locked horns over matches, finishes, locker room hierarchy, and most importantly, pride. Neither man blinked, but everyone else sure as hell did. Their feud was the wrestling version of mutually assured destruction. Neither man wanted to fire the first shot, but both carried enough heat to end it instantly. And in Mulligan's world, if you weren't useful or respectful, you were disposable, even if your name was Harley freaking Race. Andre the Giant was a walking landmark. You didn't meet Andre. You experienced him like a flood or a blackout. He was big, slow-moving, and if he didn't like you, absolutely unstoppable. So, naturally, Blackjack Mulligan, a man who considered calm discussion a coward's retreat, didn't back down. Let's be clear, this wasn't some Andre wouldn't shake my hand beef. No, this was full-on, nuclear-level hatred, ending with Mulligan getting launched through a glass door. Not figuratively, literally. According to several wrestlers, including Mulligan himself, Andre grabbed him and hurled his 300-plus-pound cowboy frame through a closed, reinforced glass panel. Imagine being so mad you throw a human battleship through a damn wall. What set it off? Classic wrestler tension. Andre didn't respect Mulligan, and Mulligan wasn't about to kiss the boots of a man who needed custom boots the size of kiddie pools. Blackjack thought Andre was arrogant and dismissive. Andre thought Mulligan was all mouth and mustache. Eventually, that friction turned into demolition. The aftermath? Silence. Nobody broke them up. Because, really, who's going to step between a giant drunk French bear and a Texan with a criminal record and two clenched fists? That's not a fight. That's a death wish in surround sound. Mulligan may have lost that round, and possibly a rib, but he never apologized. He told the story with pride, like it was just another bar fight, the kind where instead of a bar stool, someone uses a building. Wrestling's full of pretend feuds. This wasn't one of them. It was two forces of nature in cowboy boots and singlets, smashing glass, pride, and possibly OSHA laws. Blackjack Mulligan didn't fake heat, he cooked it. These weren't just grudges, they were bar fights wrapped in spandex. In a world of scripted drama, Mulligan's hate was horrifyingly real, and hilarious in hindsight. If wrestling was war, Blackjack brought a horseshoe, a prison record, and zero patience. Liked the chaos? Smash that like button like Andre smashed a Texan through glass. Subscribe for more real-life wrestling feuds, unfiltered legends, and stories that hit harder than a Mulligan right hook. Thanks for watching. Well, that was a very long video today. Hopefully you enjoyed this compilation and that you smashed that like button. Subscribe so we can keep pulling the curtain back on the dirtiest corners of this business, because no one's telling these stories the way they should be. These weren't just bad guys. They were the reason your grandma switched the channel and your dad cheered louder. Some of them were working the crowd. Others, they were just working themselves into a psych evaluation. Whether they were hated for a paycheck or genuinely hated for being walking lawsuits in boots, one thing's for sure. They made the business better by being absolute dirtbags. And if you cheered them, you probably need to get checked for foreign objects. Comment below with who you think anyone here wasn't a great heel and let me know why. This ain't nostalgia, it's the truth they never wanted us to hear. Thanks for watching.